welcome back to everyone who makes this channel part of their nightly routine. Tonight's video brings you scary stories from abandoned places and lost locations, told slowly to calm the mind. If you enjoy listening, please like, subscribe, and comment where you're tuning in from. Relax and enjoy. Story 1. Cinema Rex's last picture where the projector still runs by itself. The classified ad was tucked between listings for warehouse night guards and cemetery caretakers. Odd company, but that's where I'd been looking ever since the divorce finalized. Projectionist/caretaker needed for Cinema Rex. Live-in position, 1-month term, $2,000 per month. Inquire at main entrance, 9 p.m. No phone number, no email, just an address in a part of the city I'd never visited. A neighborhood the maps labeled as Industrial District, but that locals called the Forgotten Quarter. I was 38 years old, sleeping on my brother's couch, my life reduced to a single duffel bag and the crushing weight of failure. Sarah had taken the house, the dog, the friends we'd accumulated over 12 years. All I had left was a technical certificate in film projection from a community college I'd attended 2 decades ago, a skill as obsolete as the rotary phone. But Cinema Rex was still using film. The ad said so. Must be proficient with 35mm projectors. Someone, somewhere, still believed in celluloid. I showed up at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday in late October. The air was cold, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and distant rain. Cinema Rex loomed out of the urban gloom like a sleeping dragon. It was a grand old movie palace from the 1920s, all Art Deco curves and geometric patterns carved into weathered limestone. But time had not been kind. The marquee was a skeleton of rusted metal, its bulbs long dead, the letters spelling out Cinema Rex hanging crooked and incomplete. Boards covered the ticket windows. Graffiti scarred the walls in angry, colorful slashes. Yet the front doors, massive double doors of carved oak, stood slightly ajar, as if waiting for me. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dust, old velvet, and something else. Popcorn. Not the stale chemical scent of abandoned concession stands, but the warm, buttery aroma of freshly popped corn. It was impossible. The building had been closed for years. I followed the scent down a narrow hallway lined with peeling wallpaper depicting scenes from silent films. Chaplin, Keaton, Lloyd. Their faces faded to ghostly smudges. At the end of the hall stood a man. He was ancient, his spine curved like a question mark, his hands gnarled and spotted with age. He wore a faded red usher's jacket, its brass buttons tarnished, a flashlight dangling from a chain around his neck. His face was a road map of wrinkles, but his eyes, pale blue and startlingly clear, held a depth of sorrow that made my chest ache. "You're late," he said. His voice was a dry rasp, like pages turning in an old book. "I'm not late," I replied. "It's exactly 9. He didn't smile. "Time is different here. You'll learn." He extended a hand, not to shake, but palm up, waiting. I placed my resume in it. He glanced at it once, then tucked it into his pocket without reading. "I'm Arthur," he said. "I've been keeping the lights on. You'll find your quarters in the projection booth. The projector is in working order. Your duties are simple. Arrive at 8 p.m. Prepare the projector. Ensure it runs through the night. Extinguish the house lights at dawn. Do not watch the film. Do not enter the auditorium during the screening. Do not speak to anyone you see in the seats. Your term ends on the last night of the month. Be gone by sunrise. Before I could ask what film or why I couldn't watch it, or who might be sitting in the empty seats of a shuttered cinema, Arthur turned and shuffled away, his footsteps silent on the worn carpet. I stood alone in the hallway, the scent of popcorn growing stronger, pulling me forward like a thread. The auditorium took my breath away. It was vast, a cavern of red plush and gold leaf, now muted by decades of dust, but still magnificent. The ceiling was a domed masterpiece of painted constellations, the stars picked out in tiny embedded lights that still glowed with a soft, celestial luminescence. Rows of velvet seats cascaded down toward the screen, their crimson fabric faded to a dusty rose. And at the front, dominating the space, was the screen itself. It was pristine. Not a tear, not a stain, not a single mark of age. It glowed with a faint internal light, as if waiting. But it was the projection booth that truly unnerved me. Accessed by a narrow spiral staircase tucked behind the stage, it was a time capsule of analog technology. 2 massive 35-millimeter projectors, Century SA units, the kind they don't make anymore, stood side by side on heavy steel tables. Reels of film were stacked neatly on shelves, their metal cans gleaming in the dim light. A workbench held splicers, tape, oil cans, cleaning brushes, everything a projectionist might need. And in the center of the booth, on a small wooden table, sat a single key. Brass, old, intricately carved with what looked like film sprocket holes. A note beside it read, "For the projector, do not lose it." My quarters were a small room off the booth, a cot, a sink, a hot plate, a single window overlooking the empty street below. It was sparse, but clean. On the nightstand sat a kerosene lamp and a leather-bound ledger. I opened it. The pages were filled with entries in various hands dating back decades. Each entry was brief, almost ritualistic. October 12th, 1978. Projector ran smoothly. Film completed at 5:17 a.m. No incidents. March 3rd, 1985. Replaced bulb in left projector. Film appears unchanged. The woman in the blue dress was in her usual seat. November 19th, 1992. Storm caused power fluctuation at 2:44 a.m. Projector did not stop. Film continued uninterrupted. How? April 7th, 2001, saw him again tonight. The soldier sitting in the front row. He never moves, never reacts, just watches. September 30, 2010. Last night. I can't do this anymore. The crying won't stop. I hear it even when I'm not here. Tell them I'm sorry. The final entry was dated October 31st, 2010. Below it, the pages were blank, waiting for me. That first night, I did as Arthur instructed. At 8 p.m., I climbed the spiral staircase to the projection booth. The projectors were cold, silent. I loaded a fresh reel onto the platter system, threaded the film through the gate with practiced hands. The muscle memory was still there, buried under 20 years of irrelevance, and inserted the brass key into a small slot on the side of the machine. I turned it. The projector whirred to life, not with a hesitant sputter of old machinery, but with a smooth, confident hum, as if it had been running continuously for decades. The film began to feed through the gate. I flipped the switch that controlled the house lights. They dimmed slowly, dramatically, the way they used to in the old days. until the auditorium was bathed in near darkness. Then I pressed the button that opened the shutter. Light exploded from the projector lens, cutting through the booth's darkness and striking the screen below. Film began to play. I didn't watch. I kept my back to the viewport, my eyes fixed on the spinning reels, the steady flow of celluloid. But I could hear it, the sound of an old film print, slight hiss, the gentle whir of the platter, the crackle of an optical soundtrack, and beneath it, music, a piano score, tinny and distant, the kind that accompanied silent films. Then voices, dialogue, laughter, the sounds of a movie theater in its heyday, the murmur of a crowd, the rustle of programs, the distant chime of the usher's bell, and then screaming, not from the film, from the auditorium, real human screams of terror and pain. I spun around, my heart hammering. Through the viewport, I could see the screen. It wasn't showing a movie. It was showing the auditorium itself. The camera was positioned where I stood, looking down at the seats below. And the seats were full, packed with people in 1940s clothing, men in suits and fedoras, women in dresses and gloves, children perched on the edges of their seats, their faces lit by the glow of the screen. They were laughing, talking, enjoying the show. And then the screen went black, not a fade to black, a violent, jarring cut. The image of the happy audience vanished, replaced by darkness. And in that darkness, words appeared handwritten in what looked like blood. Fire. The word hung there for a moment, then dissolved. The screen showed the auditorium again, but now it was chaos. Smoke filled the air. People were screaming, stumbling over seats, clawing at each other in their panic. Flames licked at the edges of the screen, consuming the velvet curtains, climbing the ornate walls. I could smell it now, the acrid stench of burning wood, melting plastic, human flesh. The screams were deafening. I covered my ears, but the sound wasn't coming from speakers. It was coming from the building itself, from the walls, from the very air. I wanted to run, to smash the projector, to flee this cursed place. But my feet were rooted to the floor. I watched, paralyzed, as the fire consumed the audience, as people burned alive in their seats, as children were trampled underfoot, as the beautiful ornate ceiling collapsed in a shower of burning debris. The final image was of a little girl in a white dress, her face streaked with soot and tears, reaching up toward the projection booth as flames engulfed her. Her mouth was open in a silent scream. Then the screen went white, blinding, searing white, and the projector stopped. Silence. Absolute, profound silence. I stood there, trembling, sweat pouring down my face. The house lights came up automatically, bathing the auditorium in a soft, golden glow. The seats were empty. The screen was blank. There was no smoke, no fire, no bodies, just dust motes dancing in the light. I stumbled down the spiral staircase and into the auditorium. The air was cool, clean, no smell of smoke. I ran my hands over the seats. They were dry, undamaged. I touched the screen. It was cool, smooth. I was losing my mind. Sleep deprivation, stress, the weight of my failed life pressing down on me, manifesting in hallucinations. But when I returned to the projection booth, the film canister was warm, and on the workbench, next to the splicer, was a single charred piece of paper, a ticket stub, dated October 31st, 1948. Admission, 25 cents. Seat, orchestra, row G, seat 12. The little girl's seat, I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window in my quarters, watching the empty street below, waiting for dawn. When the first gray light filtered through the glass, I packed my duffel bag and headed for the door. I was done. I didn't care about the money. I didn't care about the job. I wasn't staying another night in this haunted tomb. But the doors were locked, not just locked, sealed. The massive oak doors had fused shut. The wood warped and twisted as if by intense heat. I pounded on them until my fists were raw. I screamed for help. No one came. No one ever came to this part of the city. I was trapped. Arthur appeared at noon as if he'd been waiting for me to give up. He stood at the bottom of the spiral staircase, his pale eyes fixed on me. "You tried to leave," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. "I can't stay here," I said, my voice cracking. "What I saw last night." "You saw the truth," Arthur interrupted. "The last picture, the one that never ends." He led me to a small office behind the concession stand, a room I hadn't known existed. The walls were covered in newspaper clippings all yellowed with age. The headline of the largest article read, "Tragedy at Cinema Rex. Fire claims 127 during Halloween screening." The date, November 1st, 1948. The article described a fire that had broken out during a special Halloween matinee, a silent film festival for children. Faulty wiring in the projection booth had sparked a blaze that spread with terrifying speed. The exits had been blocked, some by debris, others by panicked crowds. 127 people had died, most of them children. The cinema had been closed immediately after, condemned but never demolished. The city had tried to tear it down multiple times, but the building had resisted. Bulldozers broke down. Demolition crews quit after hearing whispers in the empty seats. Architects found their blueprints mysteriously altered overnight. "The projector won't stop," Arthur said, his voice barely a whisper. "It runs every night, showing the last moments of those who died here. It's not a recording. It's a memory. The building remembers, the film remembers, and they need someone to watch, to bear witness." "Why me?" I asked, my voice trembling. Arthur's eyes held mine. "Because you're the first one in 10 years who didn't run. The last caretaker lasted 3 nights. The one before him, 2. You stayed, you watched. That makes you the keeper now." He left me alone in the office. I spent the afternoon reading the clippings, studying the photographs of the victims, smiling faces frozen in time, children holding popcorn buckets, families dressed in their Sunday best. I learned their names: Margaret and Thomas Wilkins, ages 7 and 9. Eleanor Vance, 68, a retired school teacher who'd brought her grandchildren. James Miller, 34, an usher who died trying to open a blocked exit. 127 souls trapped, burning, screaming. That night, I returned to the projection booth. My hands shook as I loaded the film, threaded the gate, inserted the key. I didn't want to do this, but I couldn't leave, and I couldn't let them die alone again. I turned the key. The projector whirred to life. The house lights dimmed. The shutter opened, and I watched. I watched the happy audience. I watched the fire begin. I watched the panic, the terror, the agony. I watched Margaret Wilkins clutch her brother's hand as flames consumed them. I watched Eleanor Vance shield 2 children with her body, her face a mask of pure love even as the fire took her. I watched James Miller struggle with the exit doors, his muscles straining, his face determined, until the smoke overcame him and he collapsed, still trying to save them. I didn't look away. I bore witness. I let their pain wash over me. I let their terror become my terror. I let their final moments become a part of me. When it was over, when the screen went white and the projector fell silent, I was weeping, not out of fear, out of grief, out of respect. I did this every night. For 29 nights I climbed the spiral staircase, loaded the film, and watched the tragedy unfold. I learned to see the individuals in the crowd, the young couple on their first date, the old man who came every week to escape his loneliness, the mother who'd saved for months to bring her children to the movies. I learned their stories from the newspaper clippings, from the few artifacts Arthur showed me. A melted pocket watch, stopped at 3:17 p.m., a child's hair ribbon, a charred program from that final screening, and I began to see them during the day, not as ghosts, not as apparitions, but as impressions. A faint scent of perfume near the concession stand, the sound of children's laughter echoing from the empty auditorium, a cold spot near the exit where James Miller had died. They weren't haunting the place. They were waiting for someone to remember them, to acknowledge their lives, to honor their deaths. On the 30th night, the last night of my term, I prepared the projector as usual. But something was different. The film canister was warm before I even loaded it. The projector hummed with a strange anticipatory energy. Arthur appeared in the booth doorway, his face unreadable. "Tonight is different," he said. "The cycle is complete. The film has been witnessed. The memories have been honored. Tonight, you have a choice." "What choice?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You can leave at dawn. The doors will be open. You can return to your life, carry this memory with you, and never speak of it again. Or you can stay. You can become the keeper. You can ensure that they are never forgotten, that their story is told, that their sacrifice is honored." He left me alone with the choice. I turned the key. The projector whirred to life. The house lights dimmed, the shutter opened, but the film was different. The screen showed the auditorium just as before, the happy audience, the children laughing, the parents smiling, but this time there was no fire, no panic, no terror. The screen showed what should have been, what could have been, a perfect afternoon at the movies, laughter, joy, wonder. The little girl in the white dress, Margaret Wilkins, turned and looked directly at the camera, at me. She smiled, a real, genuine smile. Then she waved. One by one, the others turned. Eleanor Vance, James Miller, Thomas Wilkins, all of them. They looked at me. They smiled. They nodded. "Thank you," their eyes said. "Thank you for remembering us. Thank you for setting us free." The screen faded to black, not the violent black of fire and death, but a gentle, peaceful darkness. And in that darkness, words appeared, not in blood, in light. "We are at peace." The projector stopped. The house lights came up. The auditorium was empty. But the air was different, lighter, warmer, filled with the sense of completion, of closure. I stood in the projection booth, tears streaming down my face. I knew what I had to do. At dawn, I packed my duffel bag. I descended the spiral staircase for the last time. The massive oak doors stood open, the morning light streaming through. I could leave. I could return to the world, to my empty life, to my loneliness. But I turned around. I walked back up the spiral staircase. I entered the projection booth. I sat down at the workbench. I opened the ledger to a fresh page. I picked up the pen. October 31st, 2026. Projector ran smoothly. Film completed at 5:18 a.m. No incidents. They are at peace. I am the keeper now. The doors are always open. The projector always runs. And if you ever find yourself in the forgotten quarter, on a street that doesn't appear on any map, and you see a grand old movie palace with its doors wide open and the scent of popcorn on the air, know this: you are welcome. The seats are comfortable. The show is about to begin, and someone is waiting to bear witness to your story too. The Cinema Rex is open. The last picture has ended, but the memories live on, and they are no longer alone. That's where this story ends. Let's continue with the next. Point Reyes Lighthouse log, after 70 years alone and a mysterious new entry. They told me it was a simple caretaker job. 1 month, $3,500. All I had to do was stay in the old keeper's cottage at Point Reyes, make sure the automated beacon stayed lit, and log any unusual activity. Unusual being the operative word, because everyone in Sausalito knew the lighthouse had a reputation. Not haunted exactly, more like occupied. But I was past caring about local legends. My life had shriveled to a single suitcase and a bank account balance that wouldn't cover rent for another week. The sea had always been my refuge, and the idea of 30 days alone on that wind-scoured headland felt less like a job and more like an escape. Captain Vance met me at Dock 7 just before dawn. He was a man carved from driftwood and salt, his eyes the color of storm clouds, his voice rough as barnacles. He didn't ask for references or a resume. He just handed me a canvas, duffel bag heavy with canned goods, and said, "Boat leaves in 5. Don't be late." The crossing was a blur of churning gray water and biting wind. Point Reyes emerged from the fog like the prow of a sunken ship, a stark white tower rising from a jagged fist of rock that punched defiantly into the Pacific. It looked less like a beacon and more like a tombstone. The keeper's cottage was a small stone building huddled against the base of the lighthouse tower. Inside, it was sparse but functional. A cot, a wood stove, a table, a shelf of supplies, and a heavy logbook bound in oilskin, its pages yellowed and brittle. A note on the table read, "Keep the light burning. Log all observations. Do not descend to the lower gallery after dark. Term ends November 30th. Be at the dock at dawn." The handwriting was spidery, frantic, as if the writer had been in a hurry to leave. My first week was a balm. The solitude was profound, the roar of the ocean a constant comforting presence. Every evening I climbed the 313 steps to the lantern room to check the automated LED beacon, a ritual that felt necessary, sacred. I'd stand on the gallery, the wind whipping my hair, watching the beam cut through the fog, a blade of light against the encroaching dark. During the day, I walked the headland, watched the seals bask on the rocks, and tried to forget the life I'd left behind. Then I found the other logbook. It was hidden behind a loose stone in the fireplace. Smaller, leather-bound, its pages filled with elegant copper plate that grew increasingly shaky over time. The first entry was dated October 12th, 1953. First night alone. The silence is absolute. Not peaceful, but watchful. The sea doesn't sing here, it whispers. I can hear it through the walls, through the floor, like voices just below the surface. Must be the wind. Must be. Asterisk, the keeper was Elias Thorne, the last official keeper before the light was automated in one. His entries chronicled a slow descent into terror. He wrote of routine maintenance, weather patterns, ship sightings. But then came the anomalies. Lights seen far out at sea that didn't match any known vessel. A woman's voice singing a sea shanty on windless nights. Footprints in the damp earth near the cottage that led to the cliff edge and stopped. October 28th, 1953. Saw her again tonight on the lower gallery. A woman in a white dress, soaked through, her hair plastered to her face. She was looking out to sea, her hands gripping the railing. I called out. She turned. Her eyes were full of seawater. She smiled. Then she stepped off the edge. I ran down, but there was nothing, no body, just the waves laughing. November 5th, 1953. The whispering is constant now. Not one voice, but many, layered. They speak of the deep, of cold, of waiting. They know my name. They say I belong with them. They say I will join them soon. November 15th, 1953. The light is their anchor. As long as it burns, they cannot cross. But if it goes out, I must not let it go out. I will not sleep. I will watch. The final entry was a frantic scrawl, the ink blotted as if by tears or rain. November 30, 1953. They are here, in the cottage. I can hear them scratching at the door. The light is flickering. The generator. Something is wrong. I can't let it die. I won't. If you find this, keep the light burning. Do not trust the silence. Do not go to the lower gallery. They are waiting for someone to take his place. They are waiting for you. Elias Thorne vanished on December 1st, 1953. His body was never found. The official report cited accidental fall or suicide. But Thorne's log told a different story. The lighthouse wasn't just a navigational aid. It was a ward, a barrier holding back something ancient and hungry from the deep. That night, the light flickered. I was reading Thorne's log by lamplight when the steady pulse of the beacon stuttered. Once, twice. Then it died. The sudden darkness was suffocating. I grabbed the emergency flashlight and ran for the tower. At the top, I found the main power cable severed, cleanly, deliberately. As I fumbled with the backup generator, a sound froze me. Singing, faint, melodic, carried on the wind from the lower gallery. A woman's voice, clear and pure, singing an old sea shanty. I crept to the gallery door and peered out. She was there, a woman in a tattered white dress, soaked to the bone, her long hair streaming in the wind. She stood at the railing, her back to me. She turned. Her face was beautiful, serene, but her eyes were voids filled with swirling dark water. She smiled, and then she pointed, not at me, but at the sea, at something rising from the depths. I slammed the door shut, got the backup generator running, and the beacon's light stabbed back into the night. The singing stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than before, charged with a terrible patience. The next 29 days were a torment. The light never failed again, but the presence grew stronger. I'd hear footsteps on the gallery at night, see fleeting shadows, wake to find a cottage door open, the smell of salt and decay thick in the air. Thorne's log became my Bible. I followed his rules to the letter. I never went to the lower gallery after dark. I kept the light burning. I logged everything. November 2nd, 2026, light operational, wind northwest 25 knots, fog bank 2 miles offshore, heard singing at 0200 hours, did not investigate, stood watch in lantern room until dawn, November 15th, 2026. Found footprints on the path to the lower gallery leading away from the cliff. No return path. Salt water pooled on the stone step. Light remained steady. I am not sleeping. November 28th, 2026. They are testing me, whispering my name, showing me things. Sarah's face in the fog, my old apartment window across the waves, trying to make me doubt, to make me leave the light. I will not falter. I understand now. This is my penance, my purpose. On the morning of November 30th, the last day of my term, I did my final walk around a headland. The sea was calm, deceptively peaceful. As I passed the entrance to the lower gallery stairs, something caught my eye. Tucked into the rusted railing was a single, waterlogged page, fresh paper. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The handwriting was mine, not a copy, not a forgery. My own hand, writing words I had never written in an ink that smelled faintly of salt water. The entry was dated tomorrow, December 1st, 2026. Light extinguished at 0117 hours. Cause unknown. Descended to lower gallery to investigate. Saw her. She was waiting. She held out her hand. The sea was warm. The light is gone. They are free. I am home. Below the entry, in smaller script, were 3 words that chilled me to my core. Welcome to the watch. I stood there for a long time, the page fluttering in the breeze. The truth settled over me like a shroud. Elias Thorne hadn't just vanished, he'd been replaced. The lighthouse didn't just ward off the deep, it demanded a keeper, a soul to anchor the light, to hold the line against the hunger of the sea, and the sea, in its ancient patience, had chosen its next sentinel, me. I could leave. Captain Vance would be at the dock at dawn. I could run, pretend this was all a nightmare. But I knew. The moment I'd read Thorne's log, the moment I'd heard the singing, I'd been marked. The sea had tasted my loneliness, my despair, and found it compatible. My penance wasn't just for my own failures. It was for every soul lost to these treacherous waters. My purpose was to be the light, to be the wall. At dusk, I climbed the 313 steps one last time. I checked the beacon. It burned steady, a defiant eye in the gathering dark. I didn't go to the lower gallery. I stood on the upper gallery, facing the sea, the wind whipping my coat. Far out on the horizon, I saw them, lights, dozens of them bobbing on the waves, moving in a slow, deliberate pattern. Lanterns. And beneath the faint glow, I could hear the oars dipping into the water, the chorus of the drowned coming to collect their new keeper. I didn't fear them. I understood them. We were the same, lost, lonely, bound to this place by a sorrow too deep for words. My term wasn't ending. It was beginning. At dawn, Captain Vance's boat arrived at the dock. He waited for an hour, then he left, alone. The logbook on the table in the cottage remained open. On the last page, beneath my final official entry, a new line had appeared, written in an ink that glistened like wet seaweed. The light burns. The watch continues. E** Elias, or me. It no longer mattered. The Point Reyes Lighthouse stands sentinel on the edge of the world, its beam cutting through the fog, a promise to the living and a prison for the dead. And somewhere in the cottage, a new logbook waits, its pages blank, ready for the next soul the sea decides to claim. The silence is no longer empty. It is full. It is mine. And the watch never ends. And this story ends here. The next one begins now. Apex Tower's 13th floor, where the elevators hold dark memories. The classified ad was simple, almost clinical. Night security position, Apex Tower, $2,500 per month. Live-in quarters provided. 1-month term. Inquire at lobby desk, 10 p.m. No experience necessary. There was no phone number, no email address, no company name. Just an address in the financial district, a place I'd walked past 100 times without ever really seeing. Apex Tower. It stood 30 stories of weathered steel and grimy glass, a relic from the late 1970s that had somehow survived the city's relentless redevelopment. While sleek glass monoliths rose around it, Apex Tower remained, a stubborn monument to a bygone era of brutalist architecture and corporate ambition. It had been empty for over a decade, its windows dark, its lobby sealed behind heavy plywood. Until now. I was desperate. The eviction notice had been taped to my door for 3 days. A stark white rectangle that seemed to grow larger every time I looked at it. My job at the call center had ended abruptly. A round of layoffs that left me with 2 weeks severance and a mountain of debt. My girlfriend had left 2 months ago, taken most of the furniture and what little remained of my self-respect. I was 32 years old, sleeping on a friend's couch, and the classified ad felt less like an opportunity and more like a lifeline, or a warning. I couldn't tell which. I showed up at 10 p.m. on a Thursday night. The city was still awake, humming with traffic and distant sirens, but Apex Tower stood in its own pocket of silence. The plywood had been removed from the lobby doors, revealing heavy brass handles tarnished with age. I pushed one open. The air inside was cold and still, smelling of dust, old carpet, and something faintly metallic, like copper pennies left in the rain. The lobby was a time capsule of 1970s corporate grandeur. A massive marble desk dominated the space, its surface scarred and stained. Behind it, a wall of brass mailboxes, each labeled with a company name that had long since gone bankrupt or been absorbed into some faceless conglomerate. The ceiling was a grid of recessed lights, most of them dark, casting the space in a dim yellowish glow. And in the center of the lobby stood 2 elevators. Their doors were polished steel, etched with intricate Art Deco patterns that had been worn smooth in places by decades of hands. Above each door was a brass plaque with an analog floor indicator, a red needle pointing to the current floor. Both needles were motionless, pointing at L for lobby. A man emerged from the shadows behind the desk. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in a suit that might have been expensive once, but now hung on his frame like a shroud. His hair was silver white, his face a road map of deep lines, but his eyes were what unsettled me most. They were the color of pale ice, and they held no warmth, no recognition, no humanity. He didn't smile. "You're the new man," he stated, his voice a dry rasp that seemed to scrape against the silence. I nodded. He handed me a heavy brass key on a leather fob. "Your quarters are on the 25th floor. Apartment 2501. The elevators are operational. Use them only between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Do not use the service elevator. Do not go to the 13th floor. Do not press the button for the 13th floor. If the elevator stops on the 13th floor, do not exit. Close the doors and go to the lobby immediately. Is this understood?" His eyes bored into mine. Waiting for an answer I didn't know how to give, I nodded again, my throat tight. He turned without another word and vanished back into the shadows, leaving me alone with the two silent elevators. The ride up to the 25th floor was the first indication that something was wrong with Apex Tower. The elevator car was small, paneled in dark walnut, with brass handrails and a control panel of circular buttons that glowed with a soft amber light. I pressed 25, and the doors slid shut with a soft hiss. The car began to ascend with a low hum, but the ascent wasn't smooth. The car jerked slightly, as if the cables were catching on something, and then I heard it, a whisper, faint, almost imperceptible, coming from the walls of the car itself. It wasn't a voice, not exactly. It was the sound of memory, of fragments of conversations, layered over each other, overlapping in a chaotic tapestry of sound. Quarterly projections looked promising. Meeting on the 15th at 3. She said she'd meet me after work. I can't do this anymore. The whispers were accompanied by flashes of images behind my eyelids. Brief, disjointed glimpses of men in suits, women in power skirts, briefcases, coffee cups, the glow of computer monitors. It was like the elevator was replaying every conversation, every moment of anxiety, every secret shared within its walls over the past 40 years. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the brass handrail until my knuckles turned white. When I opened them again, the car was still ascending, the floor indicator clicking past 10. The whispers had stopped. I told myself it was stress, sleep deprivation, the power of suggestion. But my hands were trembling. Apartment 2501 was exactly what I expected, a corporate apartment frozen in time. The furniture was heavy and functional, a beige sofa, a glass coffee table, a television that was at least 20 years old. The walls were painted a neutral beige, the carpet a dull gray. There were no personal touches, no photographs, no books. It felt less like a home and more like a stage set. A single sheet of paper lay on the kitchen counter. It was a typed schedule. Patrol floors 20 to 30 every 2 hours. Check all stairwell doors. Ensure all windows are secure. Report any anomalies to lobby desk. At the bottom, in smaller type, the building remembers. Do not listen. I spent the first few nights in a state of heightened alertness. The patrols were monotonous, walking the empty corridors, checking doors that were always locked, peering into dark offices that held only the ghosts of desks and filing cabinets. The building was a labyrinth of silence, broken only by the occasional groan of settling steel or the hum of the ancient HVAC system. But the elevators were different. Every time I rode one, the whispers returned. Sometimes they were faint, barely audible beneath the hum of machinery. Other times they were loud, clear, almost conversational. I started to recognize patterns. The morning elevator was filled with the anxious chatter of executives rushing to meetings, the clatter of briefcases, the smell of coffee and cologne. The afternoon elevator carried the weary sighs of secretaries and junior staff, the rustle of papers, the muttered complaints about bosses and deadlines. The evening elevator was the worst. It was filled with the intimate whispers of couples meeting in secret, offices, the sound of tears being shed in corners, the quiet confessions of affairs and betrayals. The building wasn't just remembering, It was cataloging, archiving every moment of human drama that had played out within its steel and glass walls. I found the first photograph on the third night. I was checking the stairwell on the 22nd floor when I noticed something tucked into the crack of the doorframe. A small black and white photograph, curled at the edges. It showed a young woman in a 1980s business suit, her hair teased into a perfect helmet, her smile bright and confident. She was standing in front of the Apex Tower lobby desk, holding what looked like an employee badge. On the back, in faded blue ink, was written, "Sarah, first day, 1985. I slipped the photograph into my pocket, a strange sense of protectiveness washing over me. The next night, I found another, a man in a tie laughing, his arm around a colleague. Mark and Dave, happy hour, 1988. The night after, that, a group photo of a department, 20 faces, all smiling, all frozen in time. Accountant Department Christmas Party, 1991. The photographs kept appearing, always in the same stairwell, always tucked into door frames or hidden behind loose baseboards. It was as if the building was trying to tell me something, to introduce me to the people who had once called this place home. The dream started around the same time. I'd be riding the elevator, the whispers swirling around me, and the car would suddenly lurch to a stop. The floor indicator would point to 13. The doors would slide open, revealing not a dark corridor, but a brightly lit office floor. People would be everywhere, typing at computers, talking on phones, rushing between cubicles. They'd all turn to look at me, their faces expectant, their eyes wide with a mixture of hope and fear. And then one of them would step forward, a woman in a red dress, her face pale, her hands trembling. She'd reach out to me, her mouth opening to speak, but no sound would come out. The doors would slam shut, and I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. The image of her desperate face burned into my mind. I tried to research Apex Tower. During the day, when I wasn't on duty, I'd go to the public library and dig through old newspapers on microfiche. The building had been completed in 1978, hailed as a marvel of modern architecture. It had housed law firms, investment banks, advertising agencies, the cream of the city's corporate world. For 20 years, it had been a hub of activity, a place where fortunes were made and lost, where careers were built and destroyed. But then, in 1998, something happened. The records were vague, contradictory. One article mentioned a tragic incident on the 13th floor. Another referred to a corporate scandal that led to the building's rapid decline. A third simply stated that Apex Tower had been abandoned due to structural concerns. There were no details, no names, no photographs. It was as if someone had deliberately erased the building's history, leaving only fragments and whispers. On the 7th night, I broke the rules. I was riding the elevator down to the lobby for my midnight check-in. The car was unusually quiet, the whispers absent. The floor indicator clicked past 15, 14, and then paused. The car shuddered, a deep metallic groan echoing through the shaft. The needle on the indicator wavered, then settled on 13. My blood ran cold. The doors slid open with a soft hiss. The 13th floor was not what I expected. It wasn't dark or decaying. It was pristine. The corridor was brightly lit by fluorescent tubes, the carpet a deep burgundy, the walls lined with dark wood paneling. Office doors stood open, revealing empty cubicles, desks covered in a fine layer of dust. The air was still and cold, carrying the faint scent of lemon polish and old paper. And it was silent. Not the oppressive silence of abandonment, but a waiting silence, a held breath. I stepped out of the elevator. The moment my foot touched the carpet, the world shifted. The empty offices, filled with people, men in suits, women in power skirts, all moving with purpose, their faces etched with the familiar lines of corporate anxiety. They didn't see me. They moved around me as if I were a ghost. The whispers returned, louder than ever, a cacophony of voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony of memory. The board is expecting the report by Friday. I can't believe he took credit for my work. Meet me in the conference room at noon. I love you, but I can't do this anymore. I walked down the corridor, my heart hammering in my chest. The offices blurred past me, a law firm, an accounting office, a marketing agency, and then I saw it. At the end of the hall, a set of double doors marked Executive Suite. The doors were slightly ajar. Inside, a large corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A massive oak desk dominated the space, and behind the desk, a man. He was in his 50s, with silver hair and a face that had once been handsome, but was now ravaged by stress and something darker. He was staring out the window, his hands clenched into fists. On the desk in front of him was a single photograph, a family portrait, a woman, 2 children, all smiling. The man turned. His eyes were hollow, empty. He looked directly at me, and for a moment I thought he could see me. I had no choice, he whispered, his voice cracking. The numbers, they didn't lie, but the people, God, the people. He sank into his chair, his head in his hands, and then I saw them. Figures emerging from the shadows of the office, men and women in business attire, their faces pale, their eyes wide with accusation. They surrounded the man's desk, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. You promised. My family. We trusted you. The man looked up, his face mask of pure terror. I'm sorry, he choked out. I'm so sorry. And then he did it. He reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a handgun, and placed the barrel against his temple. The shot was deafening, a single crack that echoed through the silent office. The man slumped forward, blood spreading across the polished wood of his desk. The figures around him didn't react. They just stood there, watching, their whispers now a low, satisfied hum. I stumbled backward, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't a memory. This was a recording, a perfect, horrifying replay of a moment that had happened here 20 years ago. The building wasn't just remembering, it was preserving, trapping these moments in time, forcing them to replay over and over like a broken record. I turned and ran back down the corridor, the whispers chasing me, the figures turning their hollow eyes toward me as I passed. I reached the elevator and slammed my hand against the door close button. The doors slid shut, sealing me in the small, walnut-paneled car. I pressed L for lobby, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hit the button. The car began to descend, the whispers now a frantic panic chorus. Don't tell anyone. It was an accident. They'll never know. The floor indicator clicked past 12, 11, 10, and then it stopped. The car shuddered, the lights flickering. The needle on the indicator wavered, then settled on 13 again. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. "No, no, no." The doors slid open. The 13th floor was different this time. The offices were dark, the fluorescent lights flickering erratically. The carpet was stained with dark, wet patches, and the people, they were different. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with terror. They were running, screaming. I saw a woman in a red dress, the same woman from my dreams, clutching a briefcase to her chest, her face streaked with tears. She ran past me, her eyes wide with panic. "They're coming!" she screamed. "They're going to kill us all!" I followed her, my legs moving on their own. She burst into a large conference room where a dozen other people were huddled together, their faces pale with fear. At the head of the table stood a man in a security guard's uniform, his face twisted with rage. In his hand was a gun. Behind him stood two other men, also in uniform, their faces blank, their eyes dead. "This is what happens when you steal from the company," the guard snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "You think you can just walk out with millions in your briefcases? You think no one will notice?" The people in the conference room cowered, their whispers now pleas for mercy. "Please, we have families." "It was just the one time." The guard raised his gun. "You should have thought of that before you decided to be thieves." The shot echoed through the room. The woman in the red dress fell to the floor, a dark stain spreading across her chest. The other guards opened fire. The room erupted in chaos, screams, the sound of breaking glass, the smell of gunpowder and blood. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching as the people were gunned down one by one, their bodies crumpling to the floor, their blood pooling on the polished wood. The guards didn't stop till the room was silent, until every last person was dead. Then they turned and walked out, their footsteps echoing in the sudden stillness. I sank to my knees, my stomach heaving. This was the truth. This was what had happened on the 13th floor, a massacre, a corporate purge, men and women executed for their crimes, their bodies hidden, their deaths covered up. And the building had remembered. It had trapped their final moments, their terror, their pain, in an endless loop of horror. The elevator doors slid shut. The car descended to the lobby. I stumbled out, my legs weak, my mind reeling. The lobby was empty, the brass desk deserted. But on the desk, lying in a pool of what looked like fresh blood, was a single photograph. It was the woman in the red dress. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. On the back, in the same faded blue ink as the other photographs, was written, "Eleanor, last day, 1998. I spent the next 3 nights in a state of near constant terror. I avoided the elevators, taking the stairs instead, my footsteps echoing in the empty stairwells. But the building wouldn't let me go. The whispers followed me, seeping through the walls, the floorboards, the very air I breathed. I'd be walking the corridors on my patrol, and I'd hear them, faint at first, then growing louder, more insistent. "Help us. You saw what happened. Tell someone." I'd see them too. Shadows moving at the edge of my vision, figures standing in doorways, their faces pale and pleading. The woman in the red dress, Eleanor, appeared to me every night, her eyes wide with desperation, her mouth opening to speak. Words I couldn't hear. On the 10th night, I found the journal. I was checking the stairwell on the 13th floor, the floor I'd sworn never to set foot on again, when I noticed a loose floorboard near the elevator doors. I pried it up with my pocket knife, my hands trembling. Beneath it was a small metal box, rusted with age. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. I took it back to my apartment, my heart pounding. The journal belonged to a man named David Chin. He'd been a junior accountant on the 13th floor in 1998. The entries started normally, notes about work, complaints about his boss, plans for the weekend. But as the weeks went on, the tone shifted. He wrote about irregularities in the company's books, about money disappearing, about executives acting strangely. He wrote about overhearing conversations in the elevator, about whispers of a cover-up. And then the final entry, dated October 15th, 1998. I know too much. They know I know. Eleanor tried to warn me, but it's too late. They're going to make it look like an accident or a robbery. They don't care. They just want us gone. All of us. The entire department. We were getting too close. We were asking too many questions. I should have listened to her. I should have run when I had the chance. If anyone finds this, tell my wife I love her. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her. The entry ended abruptly, the page stained with what looked like dried blood. I sat there for hours, the journal open on my lap, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. This wasn't just a haunted building. This was a crime scene, a mass grave. The people on the 13th floor hadn't just died. They'd been murdered, executed, and their memories, their final moments of terror and pain, had been absorbed by the building, trapped in the steel and glass, replaying over and over in an endless cycle of horror. The elevators weren't just holding memories. They were holding souls. On my final night, the last night of my 1-month term, I made a decision. I couldn't leave, not like this, not knowing what I knew. The people on the 13th floor deserved more than to be forgotten, their deaths covered up, their memories trapped in this steel tomb. They deserved justice. They deserved to be remembered. I rode the elevator to the 13th floor one last time. The car was silent, the whispers absent. The doors slid open. The corridor was dark, the fluorescent lights flickering erratically. The air was thick with the smell of blood and gunpowder. I walked down the hall, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The offices were empty, the cubicles dark. But I could feel them, hundreds of them, watching me from the shadows, their eyes wide with hope and fear. I reached the executive suite. The double doors were closed. I pushed them open. The office was exactly as I'd seen it in my vision. The oak desk, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the photograph of the family, and, behind the desk, the man, the executive who had taken his own life. He was there, his face pale, his eyes hollow. He looked up as I entered, his expression one of pure terror. "I know," I said, my voice steady, despite the fear clawing at my chest. "I know what happened here. I know about the massacre. I know about Eleanor. I know about David Chin. I know about all of you." The man stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You can see me?" "I can see all of you," I said, "and I'm going to tell your story. I'm going to make sure the world knows what happened here. I'm going to make sure you're remembered." The man's face crumpled. Tears streamed down his cheeks. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." And then the office began to change. The walls shimmered, the furniture fading into mist. The man dissolved into a shower of golden light, his form rising toward the ceiling and vanishing. One by one, the other offices on the 13th floor began to glow with the same golden light. I could hear them, the whispers turning into sighs of relief, of gratitude. The woman in the red dress, Eleanor, appeared before me, her face peaceful, her eyes clear. She smiled at me, a real smile free of fear. Then she too dissolved into light, rising toward the ceiling and vanishing. The entire 13th floor was bathed in golden light. The whispers became a chorus of voices, all speaking at once, all saying the same thing. "Thank you." And then silence. I rode the elevator back down to the lobby. The car was silent, the whispers gone. The building felt different, lighter somehow. The oppressive weight of memory had lifted. The lobby was empty, the brass desk deserted. But on the desk, lying in a perfect circle of morning light, filtering through the glass doors, was a single photograph. It was a group photo of the entire 13th floor department. Men and women in 1990s business attire, all smiling, all alive. On the back, in fresh ink, was written, "Thank you for remembering us." I walked out of Apex Tower as the sun rose over the city. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The building was finally at peace. The elevators no longer held dark memories. They held only the light of forgiveness. And somewhere, in the archives of a newspaper or the files of a police department, a story was waiting to be told. A story of corporate greed and murder. A story of justice delayed but not denied. A story of a building that remembered and a man who listened. The 13th floor of Apex Tower is empty now. Truly empty. The ghosts are gone. But if you ride the elevator late at night, when the building is silent and the city is asleep, you might still hear them, not as whispers of terror, but as whispers of gratitude. A soft, gentle hum of memory, thanking you for remembering, thanking you for listening, thanking you for setting them free. And with that, this story comes to an end. Let's move on to the next one. The flooded town still has working streetlights beneath 6 feet of water. I took the job because the ad mentioned underwater documentation and paid $5,000 for 48 hours of work. No diving certification required, no background check. Just an email with GPS coordinates and instructions. Report to Lock Haven Reservoir Spillway at dusk. Boat and equipment provided. Document streetlights in Sector 7. Do not descend below 15 feet. The town had been flooded in 1978 when the federal government dammed the Blackwater River for hydroelectric power. 300 homes, a main street, a school, a church, all submerged beneath 60 feet of water that had since been designated a protected wildlife habitat. No one had legally entered the reservoir in 45 years, but the email insisted on documenting street lights. I told myself it was an environmental survey gig with eccentric requirements. Desperation makes you rationalize anything. The boat waited at the spillway dock, a flat-bottomed aluminum craft with an electric motor and a waterproof case containing a GoPro, a depth gauge, and a single brass key stamped with the number 7. No note, no explanation, just the key resting on top of the camera like an afterthought. I started the motor and guided the boat toward Sector 7, the eastern quadrant of the reservoir, marked on a laminated map tucked beneath the seat. The water was unnaturally still, no ripples from wind, no disturbance from fish, just a perfect mirror reflecting the bruised purple of twilight sky. At exactly 7:03 p.m., the first streetlight ignited beneath the surface. Not a flicker, not a gradual brightening. A sudden, perfect bloom of amber light 6 feet below the waterline, its glow cutting a perfect cone through the murk to illuminate a section of pavement that shouldn't have existed. I killed the motor and drifted directly above it, leaned over the gunnel with the GoPro recording. The light stood on a wrought iron pole exactly as it would have on dry land in 1978, glass globe intact, wiring visible through the water as delicate traceries of silver, the base planted firmly in cracked asphalt that stretched into darkness in all directions. And it was on, not flickering, not short-circuiting, burning with steady, impossible luminescence as if powered by a grid that had been severed nearly half a century ago. I checked the depth gauge, 6 feet exactly. The email's warning echoed in my skull. Do not descend below 15 feet. But 6 feet wasn't 15. 6 feet was just a dive. A single breath held. I stripped my underwear, strapped the GoPro to my chest, and slipped into the water. The cold hit like a physical blow, 38 degrees Fahrenheit, according to the gauge I'd clipped to my wrist. But beneath the initial shock came something worse. The water didn't feel like water. It had texture, resistance, like moving through cold syrup laced with static electricity that prickled my skin with every motion. I kicked downward, my eyes fixed on the streetlight's glow. 10 feet. 8. 6. I hovered directly beneath the surface, my face 6 feet from the light's glass globe. The amber glow cast perfect illumination across the submerged street, cracked asphalt webbed with weeds that swayed in a current I couldn't feel. A rusted mailbox stood sentinel at the curb, its flag raised as if awaiting pickup. A child's tricycle lay on its side in the gutter, one wheel slowly turning though nothing touched it. And the streetlight burned on, its filament visible through the glass, glowing with impossible heat that should have shattered the globe instantly upon contact with cold water. I reached out, just to touch the pole, just to confirm it was real. My fingers passed through solid iron as if it were mist. I jerked back, bubbles streaming from my lips, tried again. Same result. The pole existed as light and memory rather than matter. I swam to the mailbox. Same phenomenon. My hand passed through, the metal as if reaching into a projection. The tricycle's handlebars dissolved beneath my touch, but the asphalt beneath my feet was solid. The weeds brushing my legs were real. The cold was real. Only the artifacts of human habitation existed in this half-state, present but intangible, visible but untouchable. I broke the surface at 7:11 p.m., gasping, my body trembling with cold and disorientation. The boat had drifted 20 yards east. I swam to it, hauled myself aboard, and checked the GoPro footage. The video showed exactly what I'd seen. The streetlight burning steadily 6 feet down, the mailbox, the tricycle. But at the 0047 mark, something moved in the periphery. A figure standing beneath a second streetlight 50 yards east. Tall, slender, wearing what looked like a 1970s-style dress coat. It stood perfectly still, facing my camera, though the water around it remained undisturbed by breathing or movement. At 0052, it raised one arm and pointed directly at my lens. At 0058, the footage dissolved into static for 3 seconds, before returning to normal. The figure was gone. I played the clip 6 times, zoomed on the figure's face during the frames before it pointed. Where features should have been was smooth, seamless skin stretched taut over bone. No eyes, no mouth, just a suggestion of humanity wearing the skin of a man. The second streetlight ignited at 7:15 p.m., exactly 15 minutes after the first, then a third at 7:30 p.m., a fourth at 7:45 p.m. By 8:30 p.m., a perfect grid of amber light stretched across Sector 7, each burning 6 feet beneath the surface, each illuminating a section of the drowned town with impossible fidelity. I documented them all from the boat, too terrified to dive again. The GoPro captured more figures between the lights. Dozens of them now, all smooth-faced, all motionless, all facing my boat with unnerving uniformity. At 9 p.m., the depth gauge on the boat's console began counting down, not measuring depth, counting down like a timer. 14:59, 14:58, 14:57. I stared at the display, my blood turning to ice. 15 minutes. The email's warning echoed with new meaning. Do not descend below 15 feet. Not a safety precaution. A deadline. I started the motor and headed for the spillway dock. The boat moved sluggishly as if pushing through syrup. Behind me, the streetlights brightened in sequence, their amber glow intensifying until the entire reservoir surface shimmered with reflected light. The water itself began to glow, not from above, but from within, a soft bioluminescence blooming in the depths like stars igniting in reverse. At 9:07 p.m., the boat's motor died. Not sputtered, not choked on weeds, died instantly, the propeller freezing mid-turn. I tried the ignition. Nothing. The console lights remained on. The depth gauge continued its countdown. 0823, 0822, 0821. I grabbed the oars and rowed toward the distant dock lights, my shoulders burning with effort. The boat didn't move, not even an inch. I rowed harder, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The oars cut through water that had become the consistency of gelatin, offering no resistance, yet yielding no progress. I stood and looked down. Beneath the hull, the streetlights had rearranged themselves into a perfect circle surrounding my boat. And within that circle, the water had gone perfectly clear. Not murky reservoir water, but crystalline transparency, revealing the town exactly as it had existed on the morning of evacuation day, October 14th, 1978. Houses with intact roofs, cars parked in driveways, American flags hanging limp on porches, and standing in the streets, on sidewalks, in yards, hundreds of smooth-faced figures arranged in perfect tableaus of ordinary life. A woman hanging laundry, a man washing his car, children playing hopscotch on the pavement, all frozen, all featureless, all waiting. The depth gauge hit 0500. The water around my boat began to drain, not flowing away, but simply ceasing to exist. The surface dropping 6 feet in 3 seconds, until my hull settled gently on the cracked asphalt of Main Street with a soft crunch of gravel. The streetlights still burned overhead, but now they hung in air rather than water, their amber glow illuminating a town preserved in perfect stasis. The air smelled of wet pavement and coal smoke, and something sweetly rotten beneath it. Ozone and decay mingled into a scent that shouldn't have existed outside a lightning storm. I stepped out of the boat onto dry land. The temperature gauge on my wrist read 42 degrees Fahrenheit. My clothes were bone dry despite having been soaked minutes earlier. I walked toward the nearest house, a 2-story colonial with a white picket fence and a for sale sign staked in the lawn. The sign's date read October 13th, 1978. I pushed the gate open. It swung silently on well-oiled hinges. The front door stood unlocked. Inside, dust lay thick on every surface, but nothing had decayed. A pot of soup simmered on the stove, steam rising in perfect curls. A newspaper rested on the kitchen table, the headline reading, "Dam Completion Ceremony Tomorrow." The date, October 14th, 1978. I backed out of the house, walked down the street. Every home told the same story. Meals cooking on stoves, televisions playing static-filled broadcasts, beds neatly made with indentations suggesting recent occupants. But no people. Just the smooth-faced figures standing motionless in doorways and yards, their blank faces turned toward me as I passed. At the town square, I found the church. Its steeple pierced a sky that wasn't sky, a perfect replica of twilight with stars that didn't twinkle and a moon that hung motionless. The church doors stood open. Inside, pews were filled with smooth-faced figures sitting in perfect rows, all facing the altar where a single streetlight had been erected in place of a crucifix. Its amber glow illuminated a ledger resting on the pulpit. I approached slowly, opened the ledger. The pages contained names, thousands of them, handwritten in precise cursive. Each entry included a date of arrival and a single notation in the remarks column. The earliest entries dated 1978. Sarah Mitchell, October 14th, 1978, accepted the light. Thomas Chen, October 14th, 1978, resisted the current. Maria Flores, October 14th, 1978, chose the deep. The entries continued through decades, 1985, 1993, 2007, 2019. All people who had drowned in the reservoir according to newspaper clippings I'd researched before accepting this job, all documented here as if their deaths had been appointments kept rather than accidents suffered. The final entry before today's date was from 3 days ago. Daniel Reeves, July 18th, 2026, descended below 15 feet, became anchor. Beneath it, a fresh line waited with my name already written in precise cursive. Jonathan Miller, July 21st, 2026. The pen rested beside the ledger. I didn't pick it up, didn't complete the entry. Just stood there as the streetlight above the altar brightened, its glow intensifying until the entire church filled with amber radiance that seeped into my skin, my bones, the spaces between my thoughts. The smooth-faced figures in the pews turned their heads in perfect unison to face me, not threatening, not hungry, just waiting for me to make a choice. The depth gauge on my wrist hit 0015. The town began to flood, not with water rushing in from outside, with water materializing from nothing, droplets condensing in midair, coalescing into streams that flowed uphill, filling streets and homes with impossible physics. The streetlights didn't flicker, didn't short-circuit, just burned brighter as the water rose, 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet, until I stood chest deep in liquid that felt like memory given form. The smooth-faced figures didn't drown. They dissolved into the water itself, their forms unraveling into shimmering particles that swirled around me like fireflies made of light. At 0003, the water reached my chin. At 0002, my lips. At 0001, my nose. I didn't fight it, didn't struggle for air, just closed my eyes as the water covered my face and discovered a terrible truth. I could breathe it, not water, not air. Something in between, a substance that carried oxygen and memory in equal measure, filling my lungs with the collective breath of everyone who had ever lived and died in this town. The depth gauge hit 0000, the streetlights flared once, blinding white, and went dark. Absolute silence crashed down, not underwater silence, the silence of a held breath, of a moment suspended between inhale and exhale. I opened my eyes. I floated 6 feet beneath the surface of the reservoir, my body weightless, my lungs full of impossible substance. Above me, the boat drifted exactly where I'd left it. Below me, the town slept in perfect darkness. And around me, the smooth-faced figures drifted like plankton in a sea of potentiality, their forms constantly dissolving and reforming, their blank faces occasionally resolving into features I recognized from newspaper archives and obituaries. One drifted close, a woman in a floral dress, her face smooth as polished stone. She reached out and pressed a hand against my chest, not cold, not warm, just present. And in that contact, I understood everything. The town hadn't drowned in 1978. It had transformed. The dam's construction had severed its connection to the living world, but the collective consciousness of its residents, 3,000 souls facing forced evacuation, had generated enough psychic energy to preserve their home in a pocket dimension sustained by memory and light. The streetlights weren't powered by electricity. They were powered by attention, by witnesses. Every time someone discovered the lights beneath the water, their observation reinforced the town's existence for another cycle. The 15-foot warning wasn't about safety. It was about commitment. Descend below 15 feet, and you became part of the mechanism, another anchor holding the town in its suspended state. Daniel Reeves had become an anchor 3 days ago, and now it was my turn. The woman's hand remained on my chest. Her face resolved briefly into features, kind eyes, a gentle smile, hair a color of wheat. She mouthed 2 words I felt rather than heard. "Thank you." Then she dissolved back into the water. I floated there for what might have been minutes or hours or days. Time had no meaning in this place. The streetlights remained dark. The town slept, and I understood my purpose now, to wait, to watch, to become the next witness who would draw future explorers down with impossible lights and whispered promises until one of them, too, chose to descend below 15 feet and take my place. Dawn broke above the reservoir. Pale gold light filtered through 60 feet of water to illuminate the sleeping town. And at exactly 6:17 a.m., the first streetlight reignited, amber glow blooming 6 feet beneath the surface, its light cutting a perfect cone through the murk to illuminate cracked asphalt and a rusted mailbox with its flag raised as if awaiting pickup. I didn't rise to the surface, didn't swim for the boat. Just floated 6 feet down, my lungs full of memory water, my body becoming part of the current that sustained this impossible place. The GoPro still strapped to my chest, continued recording. Footage that would never be recovered, never be viewed, never explain why a man had vanished in a protected reservoir while documenting streetlights that shouldn't exist. But someone will find the boat eventually. Someone will see the lights. Someone will dive down to investigate, and when they do, I'll be waiting 6 feet below the surface, not as a monster or a ghost, but as a guide. I'll show them the town exactly as it was on the morning of October 14th, 1978. I'll let them touch the intangible artifacts. I'll watch their terror turn to wonder as they realize the water breathes and the lights remember and the town never really drowned. It just learned to live beneath the surface, sustained by the one resource reservoirs produce in abundance, the quiet desperation of people with nowhere else to go. The second streetlight ignited at 6:32 a.m., the third at 6:47 a.m. By 7:30 a.m., the entire grid burned steady beneath 60 feet of water, each lamp a beacon calling the next witness home. I am the anchor now. And anchors don't drown. They just hold the light until someone else is ready to carry it. That brings this story to a close. Let's carry on to the next one. Carousel Nocturne, where the brass horses know your deepest fears. The job listing was a single line typed on a sheet of paper taped to the community board at the edge of town. Night watchman needed for abandoned amusement park. $1,500 per month. Live-in trailer provided. Inquire at main gate, 10 p.m. No name, no phone number, just an address. A place locals called The Hollow, a derelict amusement park that had closed its gates 30 years ago after a series of unexplained disappearances. I was desperate. My life had collapsed into a single duffel bag and a crushing silence that followed me everywhere. The Hollow promised isolation, cheap, eerie isolation, and the promise of a paycheck, however meager, was enough to override the warnings in the townsfolk's eyes when I mentioned it. I showed up at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday in late October. The air was cold, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and distant rain. The Hollow loomed out of the darkness like a graveyard of forgotten joy. Rusting roller coasters clawed at the moonlit sky. Derelict food stalls stood with their shutters hanging open like broken jaws. And at the center of it all, lit by a single flickering security lamp, was the carousel. It wasn't like the cheerful, brightly painted carousels of childhood memory. This one was a monstrous thing of cast iron and dark wood, its canopy a tattered remnant of what must have once been a grand pavilion. Its horses weren't fiberglass ponies with frozen smiles. They were brass, dozens of them life-sized, their surfaces tarnished to a dull green, their eyes made of polished obsidian that seemed to drink the light. Their poses were not prancing or galloping, but rearing in terror, twisting in agony, or standing utterly still, heads bowed as if in mourning. The calliope that should have played cheerful tunes was silent, its pipes choked with rust and bird nests. An old man met me at the gate. He was gaunt, his face a road map of wrinkles, his eyes pale and watery. He wore a faded uniform jacket with the park's logo, a grinning jester, partially obscured by a heavy coat. "Name's Harlan," he rasped, his voice dry as autumn leaves. "I've been keeping the place warm. Your trailer's behind the funhouse. Duties are simple. Patrol the grounds every 2 hours, check the perimeter fence, make sure the generator stays running, and whatever you do, don't go near the carousel after midnight. Don't touch the horses. Don't look them in the eyes. Is that clear? He handed me a heavy ring of keys and a large old-fashioned flashlight whose bulb flickered weakly. Before I could ask why, he turned and shuffled away into the shadows, leaving me alone with the silent, watchful brass horses. My first few nights were a lesson in solitude. The patrols were monotonous, walking the empty midway, checking fences that were already sagging, listening to the building's groans and sighs. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of the memory of laughter, of screams of delight, of 1,000 voices raised in joy. It was a presence, a weight. But the carousel was different. Even from a distance I could feel it, a low, almost subsonic hum that vibrated in my bones. And the horses, their obsidian eyes, seemed to follow me as I passed, their tarnished brass hides gleaming faintly in the moonlight. The dreams started on the third night. I was back in my childhood bedroom, the one I'd shared with my little sister Lily. She was 8 years old again, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Don't leave me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, don't leave me alone in the dark." I reached for her, but my hands passed through her like smoke. She dissolved into a shower of dust, and I was left standing in an empty room, the silence pressing in on me like a physical weight. I woke up gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs. The image of Lily's terrified face burned into my mind. It was a memory I'd buried deep. The night of the fire, the night I'd run out of the house without her, the night she died because I was too scared to go back in, a secret shame I'd carried for 20 years. That night, during my midnight patrol, I heard it. Music, faint, tinny, like a music box playing from another room. It was a waltz, elegant and sad. I followed the sound, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. It led me to the carousel. The security lamp above it was flickering erratically, casting long, distorted shadows, and the carousel was moving. Slowly, silently, the platform rotated on its ancient bearings. The brass horses rose and fell on their poles, their movements smooth and graceful, as if they were alive. And sitting on the led horse, the largest, most terrifying of them all, its head thrown back in a silent scream, was a figure, a girl in a white nightgown, her hair long and dark, her face pale and familiar. Lily. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. But the figure turned its head and looked directly at me. Her eyes were not the warm brown I remembered. They were obsidian, empty, reflecting the flickering light like the horse's eyes. She didn't speak. She just watched me, her expression one of profound sadness. Then the carousel slowed to a stop. The music ceased. The figure vanished. Only the brass horses remained, their eyes fixed on me, their poses more menacing than ever. I ran back to my trailer, my heart pounding, my mind racing. It was a hallucination, stress, sleep deprivation, the power of suggestion. But the image of Lily's obsidian eyes wouldn't leave me. The next day, driven by a morbid curiosity I couldn't suppress, I went to the town library and dug through old newspapers on microfiche. The Hollow had opened in 1955 as Marymount Park, a family destination. For 20 years, It thrived. Then in 1978, things changed. Articles spoke of unexplained incidents, rides malfunctioning, power outages, strange noises heard at night. Then came the disappearances. First, a teenage couple who vanished after closing time. Then a maintenance worker. Then, in 1983, a little girl named Emily Vance, age 8, who'd wandered off during a birthday party and was never seen again. The final article, dated October 31st, 1983, was a terse announcement. Marymount Park permanently closed, citing structural concerns and financial insolvency. There were no details, no follow-up, just silence. And in the photo accompanying the article, standing near the carousel, was a man in a park uniform. His face was blurred, but his eyes, they were pale and watery. Harlan. That night, the carousel called to me, not with music, but with a pull, a deep, magnetic yearning that started in my bones and grew until it was all I could think about. I fought it. I locked myself in my trailer, buried under blankets, but the pull was relentless. It was a homesickness for a place I'd never been, a longing for the cold, silent peace of the brass horses. At midnight, I found myself standing before the carousel, my flashlight beam trembling in my hand. The platform was still. The horses were motionless, but their eyes, they were all turned toward me, watching, waiting, and the led horse, the one Lily had been sitting on, its obsidian eyes seemed to hold a question, a challenge. I stepped onto the platform. The moment my foot touched the worn wooden planks, the world shifted. The air grew colder, thicker. The faint scent of ozone and old metal filled my nostrils. And the whispers began, not from one direction, but from the very brass of the horses themselves. Layered, hollow voices, echoing from within their hollow bodies. You left her. You were afraid. You let her die. They weren't accusing me. They were stating a fact, a truth I'd spent 20 years running from. I walked toward the led horse. Up close, its craftsmanship was terrifyingly lifelike. Every muscle, every tendon, every vein in its neck was rendered in perfect, cold detail. Its mouth was open in that silent scream, revealing teeth of polished steel, and its eyes, they held not malice, but a profound, ancient understanding. They knew my fear. They knew my guilt. They knew the hollow space inside me where my sister's memory lived. I reached out a trembling hand and touched its cold brass flank. The effect was instantaneous. The carousel lurched to life, not with the slow, silent grace of before, but with a violent, grinding shriek of metal on metal. The platform spun faster and faster, the horses rising and falling in a frantic, jerking dance. The music returned, not the sad waltz, but a discordant, shrieking cacophony from the calliope, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. And the whispers became a roar. Face it! Remember! You were there. Images flooded my mind, not as memories, but as living reality. I was back in the burning house. The heat was unbearable, the smoke choking. I could hear Lily screaming my name from her room down the hall. Don't leave me, please. I was 8 years old again, paralyzed by fear, tears streaming down my face. I ran for the door. I didn't look back. I didn't go back for her. I left her to die. The carousel spun faster, the world a blur of tarnished brass and screaming metal. The horses' eyes glowed with a faint, internal light, their obsidian depths showing me not just my own failure, but the failures of everyone who had ever ridden them. I saw a man abandoning his family, a woman betraying her best friend, a child stealing from a sibling. The carousel wasn't just a ride. It was a confessional, a mirror. It showed you your deepest fear, not of monsters or death, but of yourself, of the choices you made, the people you hurt, the love you failed to give. And then, in the center of the maelstrom, I saw her, Lily, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as she was in that final moment. Standing in the hallway of our burning home, her nightgown singed, her face streaked with soot and tears. She looked at me, not with anger, but with a sad, gentle understanding. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice cutting through the cacophony. "I know you were scared. I forgive you." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank to my knees on the spinning platform, sobbing, not out of fear, but out of release, out of a grief I'd finally allowed myself to feel. The carousel slowed. The music softened, returning to the sad, elegant waltz. The horses stilled. Their eyes lost their accusing glare, becoming peaceful, almost kind. I don't remember walking back to my trailer. I only remember the silence that followed, the true, profound silence of a burden lifted. The carousel was no longer a monster. It was a healer, a witness. It didn't punish you for your fears. It forced you to face them, to acknowledge them, to, perhaps, find a way to live with them. Harlan found me at dawn, sitting on the steps of my trailer, staring at the carousel. He didn't say anything. He just nodded, a single, slow dip of his chin, his pale eyes holding a depth of sorrow I now understood. He'd faced his own ghosts on that brass platform. We all do. I finished my month at the Hollow. I patrolled the grounds. I checked the fences. I kept the generator running. And every night, at midnight, I would stand before the carousel and watch it spin in the moonlight, its brass horses moving in their silent, mournful dance. I never rode it again. I didn't need to. My fear had been seen. My guilt had been acknowledged. My sister's forgiveness had been given. On my last night, I left a single white rose on the seat of the lead horse, a token of thanks, a promise to remember. As I drove away from the Hollow at dawn, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The carousel was still, but for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw the lead horse lower its head as if in a bow, as if in farewell. The Carousel Nocturne still stands in the heart of the Hollow, its brass horses waiting in the silence. They are not haunted. They are guardians. They hold the fears of everyone who has ever stepped onto their platform, not to torment them, but to free them. And if you ever find yourself drawn to that derelict park on a cold moonlit night, and you hear the faint, sad strains of a waltz on the wind, know this: the horses are waiting. They know your deepest fear, and they are ready to help you face it. All you have to do is step onto the platform, take the ride, and let the brass horses show you the truth you've been running from. The ride is terrifying, but the peace that follows is eternal. And that's where this story ends. Let's move on to the next one. The last paycheck deposited to the ghost factory was last Tuesday. I took the job because the ad didn't make sense. Night watchman needed for textile mill, $750 per night. No experience required. Report to gate 3 at 11 p.m. The mill had been abandoned since 1998. I'd driven past its chain-link fence 100 times on my way to dead-end retail jobs. The skeletal remains of brick smokestacks clawing at the sky, Windows boarded with plywood bleached gray by decades of weather. Nobody hired night watchmen for ruins. But my bank account had hit negative $83 that afternoon, and the landlord's text had been explicit: tomorrow or the street. I parked my rusted Corolla on the gravel shoulder a quarter-mile from the main entrance, the engine ticking as it cooled in the October dark. A handwritten note taped to Gate 3 fluttered in the wind. Enter. Logbook on desk. Rounds hourly. Do not enter. Boiler Room B. Beneath it, a key hung from a rusted nail. No names, no company. Logo, just instructions and access. The gate shrieked open on unoiled hinges. The factory ground swallowed sound. The crunch of my boots on gravel vanished after 3 steps, as if the air itself absorbed noise. Weeds split the asphalt in thick braids, but a narrow path had been cleared to the main loading bay, the double doors standing ajar. Inside, darkness pooled like liquid. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight. The beam cut through dust motes dancing in the stale air. Conveyor belts stood frozen mid-motion, skeletal arms of industrial looms reaching toward a ceiling lost in shadow. And yet, power hummed through the space, a low thrum vibrating up through the soles of my sneakers. Emergency exit signs glowed green at corridor junctions. Somewhere deep in the building, machinery ticked with rhythmic precision. The desk sat just inside the entrance, a scarred oak surface holding a leather-bound logbook and a single ballpoint pen. Beside it, an envelope with "First Night" written in block letters. Inside, 7 crisp $100 bills and a 50. I pocketed the money with trembling hands. Too easy. Always too easy when desperation's involved. I opened the logbook. Previous entries filled the first 20 pages in a tight, precise hand. 2300 main floor secure. Temperature 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Midnight east wing clear. Humming louder tonight. 1 o'clock west corridor. Shadows moving independently of light source. Did not investigate. 2 o'clock main floor. Temperature 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Breath visible. 3 o'clock east wing. Door to boiler room B ajar. Secured it. Handle warm. 4 o'clock west corridor. Footsteps overhead. No access to upper floors per instructions. 5 o'clock main floor. Temperature 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Something watching from loom array. 6 o'clock cannot find desk. Corridors rearranged. Humming inside my teeth now. 6:15. Back at desk. How? Don't remember walking. Pen feels heavy in hand. 6:30. It knows I'm afraid. The humming feeds on it. Must stay calm. 6:45. Shadows have texture now. They cling to walls like wet cloth. 7 o'clock, the paycheck deposited at 6:58 a.m. Saw the transaction alert on my dead phone. Account was empty yesterday. How did they access it? How did they know the routing number? God help whoever reads this. Don't take the money. Don't. The final entry ended mid-sentence, the pen stroke trailing off into an ink blot shaped like a clenched fist. I checked my phone. No service, of course, but the time read 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes until my first round. I wrote my own entry with a hand that betrayed me only slightly. 2300, main floor secure, temperature 62 degrees Fahrenheit. The lie tasted like copper. I stood, pocketing the pen, and stepped away from the desk. The humming guided me. A vibration, not just in the air, but in my bones, pulling me deeper into the factory. I followed the main corridor, past silent assembly lines. my flashlight beam catching glimpses of abandoned lunches fossilized on countertops, coffee mugs filled with dust, a child's drawing taped to a supervisor's window, stick figures holding hands beneath a lopsided sun. The mill had employed entire families, 3 generations in some cases. They'd eaten lunch here, celebrated birthdays, grieved losses. All that life had seeped into the brick and steel until the place learned to mimic it. At midnight, I reached the East Wing Junction. 2 corridors branched left and right. The left led to offices, according to a faded directory. The right, marked by a rusted sign reading, "Boiler Room, be authorized personnel only," terminated in a heavy steel door. It stood slightly ajar. Warm air whispered through the gap, carrying the scent of wet wool and ozone. I didn't enter. I turned back toward the main floor, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The logbook's warning echoed in my skull. But as I retraced my steps, something felt wrong. The conveyor belts I'd passed minutes earlier now stood on the opposite side of the corridor. The supervisor's window with the child's drawing had vanished, replaced by blank brick wall. I quickened my pace, heart thudding. The desk should have been 50 yards ahead. Instead, I found myself facing the east-west junction again. The boiler room door still stood ajar, still exhaling that warm, wool-scented breath. Panic coiled in my gut. I ran this time, boots slapping against concrete, not caring about noise, left at the junction, straight through the loom array, past the loading bay doors, which were now sealed shut with fresh plywood nailed tight across the opening. I spun, disoriented. The desk sat exactly where it should have been, 10 feet to my right. I'd run in a straight line for 200 yards. I should have reached the opposite end of the factory. Instead, I'd circled back to my starting point in seconds. My entry at 1 a.m. was shorter. 1 a.m., East Wing clear, humming constant. I didn't mention the shifting corridors, didn't document the fear icing my veins. Some truths, once written down, become permanent. The next round revealed the first shadow. I'd taken the west corridor this time, desperate for a different route. Halfway down, my flashlight beam caught movement, a tall, slender shape detaching itself from the wall beside a dormant carding machine. It didn't move like a person. It unfolded, stretching upward until its head brushed the 20-foot ceiling, limbs elongating like taffy pulled thin. Then it stepped forward, not walking, but sliding, its form absorbing my light rather than casting a shadow of its own. I froze, breath trapped in my lungs. The thing paused 10 feet away, featureless where a face should be. Then it raised one impossibly long arm and pointed down the corridor, not at me, but past me, toward the distant glow of an emergency exit sign that hadn't been there before. I ran, didn't look back, burst into the main floor at 2:03 a.m., sweat soaking my shirt despite the dropping temperature. 58 degrees Fahrenheit, according to the wall thermometer beside the desk. My hand shook so badly I smeared ink across the page right in my next entry. By 3 a.m., the humming had migrated inside my skull, a low C-sharp vibrating behind my eyes. I found the boiler room door wide open during my East Wing round, heat rolling out in visible waves. I stood at the threshold, pen light trembling in my grip. Beyond lay not a boiler room, but an exact replica of the main floor. Same desk, same logbook, same emergency exit signs glowing green. And sitting at that distant desk, a figure with my posture, my jacket, my haircut, writing furiously in a ledger. It looked up. Its face was mine, but the eyes were solid black, depthless. It smiled without moving its lips. The humming spiked to a painful frequency. I stumbled backward, slamming the boiler room door shut. The handle burned my palm. 4 a.m. brought footsteps overhead. Slow, deliberate, not one pair, but dozens. Shuffling gait of work boots on concrete, the occasional metallic clink of tools in pockets. Shift change. The night crew heading home, the day crew arriving. Except there were no upper floors accessible from inside the mill. The blueprints I'd seen online showed only a single story. I stood beneath the ceiling tiles, listening to an entire factory workforce moving through spaces that didn't exist. At 5 a.m., the shadows gained texture. I saw it in the west corridor, a patch of darkness beside a rusted spindle that didn't match the angle of my flashlight beam. It clung to the wall like wet fabric pulsing faintly. As I watched, it peeled away from the surface, stretching into a crude approximation of a human shape with too many joints at the elbows. It didn't approach, just stood there, swaying gently, as if waiting for me to acknowledge it. I backed away slowly, not breaking eye contact until I'd retreated around a corner. When I dared to look back, the corridor was empty, but the air where the shadow had stood remained cold. 42 degrees Fahrenheit, according to my phone's thermometer app, though the rest of the corridor read 53 degrees Fahrenheit. 5:45 a.m. I stopped making rounds, sat at the desk with my head in my hands, the logbook open to the previous watcher's final warning. Don't take the money, but I already had. $750 folded in my wallet felt heavier than lead. What had I agreed to by accepting it? What debt had been transferred with that cash? That's when I noticed phone in my pocket vibrating. No service. I checked repeatedly, but the screen glowed with a banking app notification I'd never installed. Direct deposit received, $750. Source, Black River Textile Payroll. The timestamp read 5:47 a.m. My actual bank account had been negative $83 yesterday. I'd have to wait until morning to verify, but my hands knew the truth. They'd felt that envelope's weight. The money was real, the deposit was real, and the factory had accessed my account without my permission, without my password, without any possible authorization. 6 a.m. The humming stopped. Absolute silence crashed down like a physical force. My ears rang in the sudden void. I stood, legs unsteady, and walked toward the loading bay. The plywood sealing the doors had vanished. Dawn light, pale watery gray, filtered through the open entrance. Freedom. I didn't run, didn't sprint for my car. Something in the silence felt like a test, like the factory was watching to see if I'd flee in panic, feeding it one last burst of fear energy before release. I walked slowly, deliberately, my boots echoing in the unnatural quiet. 10 feet from the exit I paused. A single playing card lay face up on the concrete, the Queen of Hearts. Not faded or yellowed, fresh from a new deck, edges crisp, colors vibrant. I'd seen that card before, in the previous watcher's logbook, tucked between pages 17 and 18 as a bookmark. He'd drawn a tiny heart in the corner with red pen. This card had the same marking. I stepped over it without touching it, crossed the threshold into morning light. My car sat exactly where I left it. Dew glittered on the windshield. I drove without looking back, hands gripping the wheel at 10 and 2, knuckles white. At the first gas station 20 miles east, I used the ATM. My account balance, $667. The deposit had gone through, but not the full amount. The factory had taken its cut, $83, precisely the negative balance I'd carried yesterday. It hadn't just paid me, it had settled my debt, and in doing so, claimed ownership of the transaction. I didn't spend the money, couldn't. It sat in my account like a stone in my gut. I called the bank to report fraudulent access. They found no record of the deposit. Your account shows a balance of negative $83, sir. No activity since Tuesday. Last Tuesday, the date on the previous watcher's final entry. I drove back to the mill that night, not for the money, for answers. The gate stood open. The logbook remained on the desk, now open to a fresh page. My name was written at the top in handwriting that wasn't mine. Beneath it, a single sentence. The factory doesn't pay its workers. It absorbs them. The paycheck is the transfer receipt. I left without writing an entry, without taking another dollar. But as I drove away, my phone buzzed again. Another banking notification. Direct deposit scheduled, $750. Source, Black River Textile Payroll. Deposit date, next Tuesday. The factory had already scheduled my next shift, and my account, according to the app that shouldn't exist, now showed a balance of exactly $0, waiting to be filled, waiting to be claimed. I haven't slept since. Every Tuesday, the notification arrives precisely at 6:58 a.m. The money never appears until I physically stand inside the mill's entrance. Last week, I waited until 11:59 p.m. before stepping across the threshold. The deposit hit my account at midnight. I left after 15 minutes. Didn't make rounds, didn't open the logbook, just stood near the door until the transaction cleared, then walked out. The balance resets to $0 every Monday night. I'm writing this in a motel room 3 states away. The door is locked, the curtains are drawn. But on the desk beside my laptop sits a single playing card, the Queen of Hearts, fresh from a new deck, a tiny red heart drawn in the corner. I didn't bring it here, didn't see anyone enter the room. My phone just vibrated. Next Tuesday's deposit has been scheduled. The factory isn't abandoned. It's between shifts. And it's always hiring. That's where this story ends. Let's continue with the next. The abandoned train station announces arrivals for trains that never come. I took the job because the posting mentioned historical preservation and paid 3 times the minimum wage. No interview, no background check. Just an email with coordinates and instructions. Report to Blackwater Station at 10 p.m. Key under 3rd flower pot on west entrance. Log arrivals in ledger on conductor's desk. Do not miss any announcements. The station had been abandoned since 1972 when the floodwaters swallowed the tracks for 50 miles in either direction. No trains had run through Blackwater in 50 years, but the email insisted on logging arrivals. I told myself it was a night security gig with eccentric requirements. Desperation makes you rationalize anything. The station stood alone in a field of waist-high grass, its brick facade bleached pale by decades of weather. Ivy clawed up the walls but stopped precisely 6 inches below the roof line as if repelled by an invisible barrier. Thursday, okay. Platform stretched into darkness in both directions. The tracks beyond it vanished beneath a carpet of vegetation that looked deliberately cultivated. Uniform height, no weeds, no debris. like a lawn grown over a grave. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, dust lay thick on every surface, but nothing had decayed. No water stains on the vaulted ceiling, no pigeon nests in the rafters, no rust on the ticket window's iron grates, just stillness and the faint scent of coal smoke and lemon polish. The conductor's desk sat center platform beneath a massive analog clock whose hands had stopped at 11:17. A leather-bound ledger rested open atop it, filled with precise handwriting. 2200. Station secure. Temperature 64 degrees Fahrenheit. 22:15. Announcement for 10:15 express to Albany. No train. 22:30. Station secure. Temperature 63 degrees Fahrenheit. 22:45. Announcement for 10:45 local to Millersburg. No train. 2300. Station secure. Temperature 62 degrees Fahrenheit. 23:15. Announcement for 11:15 express to Albany. No train. Platform mist observed. 23:30. Station secure. Temperature 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Mist receding. 23:45. Announcement for 11:45 local to Millersburg. No train. Footsteps heard on tracks. 00. Station secure. Temperature 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Footsteps ceased. 00:15. Announcement for 12:15. Express to Albany. No train. Figure observed at far end of platform. 0:30. Station secure. Temperature 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Figure gone. 0:45. Announcement for 12:45 local to Millersburg. No train. Whistling heard. 1 o'clock. Station secure. Temperature 52 degrees Fahrenheit. Whistling ceased. 1:15. Announcement for 1:15 express to Albany. Train observed approaching. Did not stop. Passengers visible at windows, all facing away from platform. 1:30. Station secure. Temperature 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Train departed eastbound. No sound of wheels on tracks. 1:45. Announcement for 1:45 local to Millersburg. No train. Cold intensifying. 2 o'clock. Cannot find conductor's desk. Platform elongated. Temperature 42 degrees Fahrenheit. 2:15. Back at desk. No memory of return. Hands numb. Announcement imminent. 2:30. Announcement for 2:30 express to Albany. Train arrived. Doors opened. Something inside called my name. Did not board. 2:45. Station secure. Temperature 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Regret not boarding. 300. Announcement for 300 local to Millersburg. Train arrived. Doors opened. Something inside called my mother's name. She's been dead 20 years. 3:15. Cannot write straight. Pen heavy. Cold in bones. They're waiting. 3:30. Announcement for 3:30. Express to Albany. Train arrived. Doors opened. I see them now. The passengers. They're not facing away. They have no faces. Just smooth skin where features should be. 3:45. Boarding next train. Better than waiting. Better than the cold. Better than the announcements that know things they shouldn't know. 4 o'clock. The page ended with a single sentence scrawled so hard the pen had torn through the paper. The trains don't stop here anymore because no one left to meet them. I checked my phone. 10:03 p.m., 3 minutes until the first announcement. I pocketed the key. Stupid, I know, before completing the job, but the weight of it felt like an anchor. I sat at the conductor's desk and waited. At exactly 10:15 p.m., the station speakers crackled to life. "Attention passengers, the 10:15 express to Albany is now arriving on track 1. Please have your tickets ready." The voice was warm, paternal, slightly crackled with age, but perfectly clear. It came from speakers mounted along the platform ceiling, speakers coated in dust, but functioning with impossible fidelity. I stood and walked to the edge of the platform. Track 1 was a tangle of weeds and rusted rails half buried in soil. No train approached. No headlight pierced the darkness. Just the whisper of wind through tall grass. I returned to the desk and wrote my first entry with a hand that only trembled slightly. 22:15. Announcement for 10:15 express to Albany. No train. The lie felt like surrender. But what was the alternative? Documenting that I'd heard a ghost? The pattern repeated every 15 minutes. 10:45 local to Millersburg, 11:15 express to Albany. Each announcement crisp and warm, each train absent. I made rounds between entries, walking the platform's length, checking the boarded ticket windows, peering into the darkness beyond the tracks. Nothing moved except the slow creep of cold. The temperature gauge beside the conductor's desk ticked downward with each passing hour. 63 degrees Fahrenheit. 62 degrees Fahrenheit. 61 degrees Fahrenheit. At 11:15 p.m., something changed. The announcement played as scheduled, but this time a fine mist rolled across the platform, not from the fields, but from the tracks themselves, coalescing from nothing into a knee-high fog that smelled of damp wool and coal smoke. I stepped back from a platform edge as the mist thickened, swirling in patterns that suggested footsteps, though no feet disturbed its surface. The mist reached the station wall, paused, then receded as quickly as it had appeared. The temperature gauge read 59 degrees Fahrenheit. I didn't write about the mist, didn't document the footsteps I'd almost heard beneath the mist's whisper. Some truths, once committed to paper, become permanent. Midnight brought the first figure. The 12:15 announcement crackled through the speakers. As the voice faded, I saw it, a silhouette at the far eastern end of the platform where the brickwork dissolved into darkness. Tall, motionless, too far to discern features, but unmistakably human-shaped. I stood frozen, my pen hovering over the ledger. 30 seconds passed. A minute. The figure didn't move, didn't approach, just stood at the edge of visibility like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence. I forced myself to walk toward it. 20 steps, 40, 60. The platform seemed to stretch beneath my feet. The figure remained the same distance ahead no matter how far I walked. At 100 steps, I stopped, turned around. The conductor's desk was gone. The station building had vanished. I stood on an infinite platform suspended in starless blackness, the mist curling around my ankles. Panic seized my throat. I spun back toward the figure. It stood 10 feet away now, not a person, a suggestion of a person, light and shadow arranged into humanoid shape, featureless where a face should be. It raised one arm and pointed down the platform behind me, not threatening, directing. I turned. The station had reappeared exactly where it should have been, the conductor's desk visible beneath the stopped clock. I ran, didn't look back, collapsed into the chair at 12:32 a.m., my shirt soaked with cold sweat. The temperature gauge read 54 degrees Fahrenheit. My entry was a single line. 0030. Station secure. Temperature 54 degrees Fahrenheit. I didn't mention the figure. Didn't document the infinite platform. The ledger felt like a contract now, every truth I wrote binding me deeper to this place. At 1:15 a.m., the impossible happened. The announcement. Played. Then came sound, a low, mournful whistle, cutting through the night. Not from speakers, from the tracks. Real sound, physical vibration traveling up through the platform's concrete. I stood slowly, my blood turning to ice. Headlights pierced the darkness, two perfect circles of gold advancing with impossible silence. No rumble of diesel, no screech of wheels on rails, just the whistle and the light growing steadily brighter. The train emerged from the mist, not a modern locomotive, a steam engine from another century, polished brass gleaming, smokestack exhaling vapor that smelled of cinnamon and regret. Behind it stretched passenger cars with lit windows revealing silhouettes moving within. The train slowed as it approached the platform, brakes hissing with authentic pressure. It stopped precisely aligned with the yellow safety line painted on the platform edge. Doors slid open with soft hydraulic sighs. Inside the nearest car, passengers sat in plush, velvet seats, all facing away from the platform, all perfectly still. The air around the open doorway shimmered with cold, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, according to the gauge that now stood beside the door, though I'd left it on the desk. A voice emerged from the car, not the announcement voice, but something older, softer. It spoke my name, not shouted, not whispered, just stated, as if confirming an expected arrival. I didn't move, didn't breathe, stood frozen as the voice spoke again, adding my mother's maiden name, the name I hadn't heard since childhood, the name my father took to his grave. The doors began to close. I lunged forward without thinking, my hand outstretched to stop them. My fingertips brushed the door's edge and recoiled instantly. The metal wasn't cold. It was warm, pulsing with a slow rhythmic heat like living tissue. The doors sealed shut. The train pulled away without sound, its taillights shrinking into the darkness until only the mist remained. I stumbled back to the desk. My entry at 1:30 a.m. was illegible, ink smeared by trembling hands. I tried again. 1:30, train observed, did not board. The words felt like a betrayal, like I'd refused an invitation I'd spend the rest of my life regretting. The cold intensified after that. 48 degrees Fahrenheit. 42 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Fahrenheit. My breath plumed in thick clouds. I wrapped my arms around myself, rubbing my hands together, but the cold penetrated deeper than skin. It seeped into bone, into thought itself. At 2:15 a.m., the platform elongated again. I stood to make my round and walked for 5 minutes without reaching either end. The station building remained visible ahead but never grew closer. Behind me, the darkness deepened into something solid, a wall of absence that pressed against my back with physical force. I stopped walking, closed my eyes, counted to 10, opened them. I sat at the conductor's desk, the ledger open to a fresh page, no memory of returning. My hands were numb blocks, incapable of holding the pen. The temperature gauge read 34 degrees Fahrenheit. The 2:30 announcement played. Attention passengers, the 2:30 express to Albany is now arriving on track 1. Please have your tickets ready. The train appeared exactly as before. Silent approach, warm headlights, doors sliding open with that soft sigh. This time, the passengers had turned. Not fully, just enough to show the backs of their heads, the smooth, seamless skin where features should have been, and they were holding tickets, small white rectangles clutched in hands that seemed to have too many joints. The voice from the car spoke again. Not my name this time, my social security number, digit by digit, then my childhood address, then the name of my first pet, a detail I'd never told anyone, not even my parents, because I'd invented the dog in my imagination during a lonely summer at age 7. The doors began closing. I stood, took one step toward the platform edge, stopped, turned back to the desk, sat. The doors sealed. The train departed. The temperature gauge read 30 degrees Fahrenheit. At 3 a.m., the local to Millersburg arrived. The voice from the car spoke my mother's name, then my father's, then the name of my stillborn brother, the child my mother had miscarried at 5 months, the loss she'd carried in silence for 40 years, the secret I'd discovered only in her diary after her funeral. The doors opened. I stood, walked to the platform edge, stared into the car. The faceless passengers turned slightly, their smooth heads tilting in unison as if listening. One extended a hand, not toward me, but palm up, offering an empty space where a ticket should rest. I stepped back, returned to the desk, wrote, 0300, train observed, did not board. The temperature gauge read 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Frost bloomed across the ledger's pages in delicate fractal patterns. My pen froze to my fingers. I pried it loose with teeth that chattered uncontrollably. At 3:15 a.m., the announcement played for a train that didn't exist in the schedule. The iChop 3:15 midnight special to nowhere. The voice was different now. Not warm, not paternal. My voice, speaking from the speakers with perfect fidelity. You've waited long enough, it said. They're waiting for you. Your mother, your father, the brother you never met. They're all aboard. All the people you've lost. All the moments you've regretted. The train collects what the world leaves behind, and you've left so much behind. The train that arrived wasn't steam or diesel. It was made of light and memory, a shimmering construct of every train I'd ever seen in photographs, films, dreams. Its cars stretched into impossible distance, windows glowing with the warm light of every home I'd ever missed. The doors opened, and I saw them, my mother smiling from a window seat, my father waving from the vestibule, a child who might have been my brother pressing small hands against the glass. The voice, my voice, spoke one final time. The only ticket required is surrender. I stood, walked to the platform edge. The cold no longer bothered me. The fear had burned away, leaving only a profound, aching loneliness. I had spent my life running from loss, from regret, from the empty spaces people leave behind, and here was a train that promised to fill every one of them. I took one step forward, then stopped, because I saw it. The reflection in the train window wasn't my face approaching the door. It was the previous watcher's face, the one who'd written the ledger entries. His features were stretched in terror, his mouth open in a silent scream, his hands pressed against the inside of the glass as if trying to escape. Behind him, the faceless passengers turned their smooth heads toward him, not with malice, but with hunger. The train didn't collect the lost. It collected the lonely. And loneliness was a currency this place consumed with endless appetite. I stepped back, turned, walked to the conductor's desk. The temperature gauge read 26 degrees Fahrenheit. My fingers were blue, blocks incapable of gripping a pen, but I managed 3 words on a fresh page. I did not board. At 3:30 a.m., dawn began bleeding gray at the eastern horizon. The announcements ceased. The cold receded. The station returned to stillness, just dust and decay and the faint scent of coal smoke. I sat at the desk until sunlight touched the platform, my body stiff with cold, but my mind terrifyingly clear. I left at first light, didn't look back. Drove until my car sputtered onto a highway with other vehicles and gas stations and the blessed noise of civilization. I showered in a motel bathroom for an hour, scrubbing my skin until it burned, trying to wash away the memory of that warm, pulsing door. But the station didn't release me unmarked. That evening, my phone buzzed with a notification from an app I'd never installed. Your next shift begins tonight at 10 p.m. Blackwater Station awaits. The temperature in my motel room dropped 10 degrees in seconds. Frost bloomed across the window pane in perfect fractal patterns, and from the hallway outside my door came the soft, mournful whistle of a steam engine that hadn't run in 50 years. I'm writing this in a diner 3 states away. The waitress just refilled my coffee without being asked. She has kind eyes. I almost told her everything, almost described the faceless passengers and the warm doors and the voice that knew my secrets, but I stopped myself, because as she walked away, I saw it, the faint tracery of frost visible just beneath the skin of her wrists when she held the coffee pot at a certain angle to the light. The station isn't haunted by the dead. It's staffed by the almost lost. And it's always hiring night watchmen to log arrivals for trains that never come. Because someone has to witness the hunger. Someone has to refuse the invitation. Someone has to sit at the conductor's desk and write "No train" while the doors open and the voices call your name. My phone just buzzed again. 9:47 p.m. 13 minutes until my shift begins. The diner's front door just opened, though no one entered, and from the speakers above the counter, a system that only plays 1950s pop music, came a voice warm and paternal and impossibly familiar. Attention passengers, the 10 p.m. shift relief is now arriving on track 1. Please have your keys ready. I can smell coal smoke and lemon polish, and I can't remember which direction leads home anymore. That brings this story to a close. Let's carry on to the next one. The highway that vanished from maps still has cars parked along its shoulder. I found the road because my GPS died at the worst possible moment. A sharp left turn on County Route 42 where the asphalt dissolved into gravel without warning. My phone screen flickered to static, then black. No signal bars, no emergency calls. Just the hum of tires on loose stone and the slow creep of dusk bleeding orange across the sky. I should have turned back immediately, but the gravel road stretched straight and level ahead, and pride is a powerful fuel when you're already lost. 20 minutes in, the trees fell away on both sides, revealing a sight that made me brake hard enough to fishtail. A 4-lane divided highway, cutting through the wilderness like a surgical scar. Perfect asphalt. faded but intact, lane markings, guardrails gleaming dully in the twilight, and running alongside it in both directions, a continuous line of vehicles parked shoulder to shoulder as far as my headlights could reach. Not abandoned wrecks, not rusted skeletons picked clean by time. These cars were pristine. Late 90s sedans with uncracked windshields, early 2000s SUVs with full tanks of gas visible through translucent fuel gauges, even a few newer models that couldn't have been more than 5 years old. All parked with military precision, wheels perfectly parallel to the white line, engines cold, but interiors untouched. No luggage on roofs, no emergency triangles in rear windows, just vehicles left exactly as their drivers had exited them, keys presumably still in ignitions, lives suspended mid-motion. I killed my engine and stepped out into silence so complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums. No wind in the pines, no insect hum, just the slow tick of my own cooling engine and the faint, sweet smell of gasoline and something else, ozone, like the air after lightning strikes. A green highway sign stood at the entrance to this impossible stretch of pavement. The top placard read Interstate 84 in standard federal font. Beneath it, a smaller sign bore a single word in block letters, Welcome. I checked my phone again. Dead. But my car's dashboard clock still worked, 6:47 p.m. I walked to the nearest vehicle, a silver Honda Accord with Pennsylvania plates, and peered through the driver's side window. The seat was pushed back as if for a tall driver. A coffee cup sat in the holder, its contents dark and still. A folded newspaper rested on the passenger seat. I tried the door handle, unlocked. Inside, the air was cool and carried the faint scent of pine air freshener. The newspaper was dated October 17th, 2003. The front page headline, Local Teacher Honored for Volunteer Work. I flipped through the pages, local news, sports scores, comic section, with a half-finished crossword puzzle, pen still tucked in the crease. Nothing suggested emergency or flight. Just an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, interrupted. I moved to the next car, a red pickup truck, with Nebraska plates. Same story. Keys in the ignition, wallet on the seat, containing $23 and a driver's license belonging to Robert J. Miller, born 1968. A family photograph tucked in the sun visor. Robert smiling beside a woman and 2 children on a beach I didn't recognize. The photo felt warm to the touch, as if recently handled. The third car held a child's car seat with a stuffed rabbit buckled into the harness. The fourth contained a laptop open to a half-written email. The fifth held groceries in the trunk, milk still cold to the touch, bread wrapped in plastic that crinkled with fresh resistance. I walked a quarter-mile down the shoulder, checking vehicles at random. Everyone told the same story. Ordinary people engaged in ordinary activities. Their lives paused with surgical precision at approximately 6:45 p.m. on various dates spanning 3 decades. A 1997 minivan with Disney World souvenirs on the back seat. A 2011 hybrid with a yoga mat in the trunk. A 2024 electric sedan with a phone charger still plugged into the console, all frozen, all waiting, and all facing the same direction, eastbound. I returned to my car and made a decision that still haunts me. I would drive the highway just to the next exit, just to see where it led. I pulled onto the asphalt and accelerated to 55 miles per hour. My headlights cutting twin tunnels through the gathering dark. The road stretched straight ahead, perfectly maintained, the painted lines unwavering. No potholes, no cracks, no signs of weathering, despite the wilderness pressing close on both sides. Mile markers appeared at precise intervals, 0, 1, 2, each one pristine, the numbers freshly painted, though no maintenance crews had passed this way in decades, if ever. At mile marker 7, I saw the first body. It stood beside a blue station wagon, one hand resting on the roof as if taking a brief rest during a long journey. Male, late 50s, wearing khakis and a polo shirt. His back was to me as I slowed the car. I rolled down my window. "Sir, are you okay?" He didn't turn, didn't acknowledge my presence, just stood there, perfectly still, his posture relaxed as if enjoying a pleasant evening stroll. I killed the engine and stepped out. "Sir?" I circled the car to face him. Where his face should have been was smooth, featureless skin stretched taut over bone. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just seamless flesh the color of old parchment. He didn't move, didn't breathe. But when I reached out to touch his shoulder, just to confirm he was real, his head rotated a full 180 degrees to face me directly. The smooth skin of his face tilted slightly as if listening. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs. The thing didn't pursue, didn't move at all beyond that impossible rotation. I scrambled back into my car, locked the doors, and accelerated eastbound without looking back. At mile marker 12, I saw more of them. Dozens. Standing beside their vehicles or walking slowly along the shoulder, all moving eastward with that same unhurried gait, all faceless, all silent. They parted to let my car pass without breaking stride, their smooth heads turning in unison to track my movement. None approached. None reached for my vehicle. They simply observed with whatever senses remained beneath that seamless skin. I drove with white knuckles on the wheel, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. The dashboard clock ticked forward. 7:03 p.m., 7:04 p.m., 7:05 p.m. At 7:07 p.m., it stopped. The digital display froze on 7:07. I glanced at my phone, miraculously powered on now, screen glowing with impossible signal bars. The time read 7:07 p.m. exactly. I looked up just as my headlights illuminated the next mile marker. It read 7:07. Not mile 7.07. The marker itself displayed the time, 7:07, in place of a distance measurement. I slammed the brakes. The car skidded to a halt on the pristine asphalt. I stepped out, legs unsteady, and approached the sign on trembling feet. Beneath the time, smaller lettering read, "Your appointment." I turned slowly, taking in the highway stretching in both directions. The faceless figures had stopped their walking. Every one of them stood perfectly still, facing my car. Hundreds of them now, men, women, children, all smooth-faced, all silent. They didn't advance, didn't retreat, just waited. A new sound began, not from the figures, but from the cars themselves. A soft, rhythmic clicking from every vehicle within earshot, not engine starting, not hazard lights activating. The sound of turn signals, left turn signals, all blinking in perfect unison, their amber lights pulsing like a single heartbeat, stretching the length of the highway. Click whir, click whir, click whir. I ran back to my car, threw it into reverse, and accelerated westbound, the direction I'd come from. The faceless figures didn't move to stop me, just watched with their blank faces as I fled. Mile markers flashed past in reverse: 7:06, 7:05, 7:04. The clock on my dash remained frozen at 7:07. At mile marker 3, I saw my exit, a narrow gravel road branching northward, identical to the one I'd entered on hours earlier. I swerved onto it without slowing, tires spitting stone, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The highway vanished behind me, swallowed by trees. After 2 miles, my GPS flickered back to life. Signal bars returned. The screen displayed my location with perfect accuracy. I drove until dawn, stopping only when I reached a 24-hour diner 50 miles from anything resembling civilization. I ordered coffee and sat in a vinyl booth watching the sunrise through a clean window. My hand still trembled when I lifted the mug, not from cold, from the memory of those smooth faces turning in unison, from the certainty that I'd been expected. The waitress refilled my cup without being asked. "Rough night?" she asked, her eyes lingering on my dust-caked shoes. I almost told her everything, almost described the highway and its silent congregation. But something stopped me. The memory of those turn signals blinking in unison, that perfect rhythm suggesting a system far older and more patient than I could comprehend. "Just got lost," I said. She nodded slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. "Happens more than you'd think around here. Folks take a wrong turn on County 42, end up on roads that shouldn't exist." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "They say there's a highway out there that collects people, not the dead, the almost dead, the ones who should have died in car crashes but walked away, the ones who survived heart attacks in the middle of nowhere. The highway finds them when they're lost, gives them an appointment they can't miss." I set my coffee down carefully. "What kind of appointment?" She straightened up, her professional smile returning. "That's not for me to say. But if you ever find yourself on a road with cars parked too perfectly along the shoulder, don't stop to help anyone, don't accept rides, and whatever you do, don't look at your clock when it hits 7:07. She walked away before I could ask more. I finished my coffee and paid in cash, leaving a generous tip. As I walked to my car, I noticed something strange, a faint tracery of amber light, like the glow of a turn signal, visible just beneath the skin of my wrists when I held them at a certain angle to the morning sun. It faded as I watched, but I knew it would return, in moments of stillness, in the space between waking and sleep. I drove straight to a mechanic in the next town over. "Check everything," I told him, "especially the turn signal mechanism." He spent 3 hours under the hood and inside the dashboard. When he emerged, his face was pale. "Your left turn signal is physically disconnected," he said. "The wiring's been cut. Has been for a while by the look of the corrosion. It shouldn't work at all." I didn't tell him it had. Been blinking perfectly in unison with hundreds of other cars just hours earlier. Didn't tell him about the frozen clock or the faceless figures or the mile marker that displayed my appointment time. Some truths, once spoken aloud, become invitations. That was 3 weeks ago. I've moved twice, changed my phone number, avoided all roads with gravel shoulders. But every day at 7:06 p.m., my devices freeze. Every night at 7:06 a.m., I wake to the sound of rhythmic clicking. Last Tuesday, I found a single amber LED blinking steadily on my dashboard, though no turn signal was activated. I disconnected the car battery, Yesterday, the blinking appeared on my laptop keyboard. Tiny lights pulsing beneath the F and G keys in perfect 707 rhythm. The highway didn't take me that night. It just scheduled me. And appointments on that road are never canceled, only rescheduled for those who try to run. I'm writing this at 7:06 p.m. The air in my apartment has gone still. My laptop clock is stuttering. 7:06:53, 7:06:54. I can hear them now, not on the highway, but in the walls themselves. The soft, rhythmic click whir of turn signals counting down the final minute. 7:06:58, 7:06:59. The highway isn't haunted by the dead. It's maintained by the almost dead, and it always needs new attendants to keep the lanes clear for the next appointment. 7:07:00. My left turn signal has started blinking on its own, and I can't remember which direction leads home anymore. And that's where this story ends. Let's move on to the next one. The power still runs in the town. They evacuated 30 years ago. I should have known something was wrong when the realtor handed me the keys without asking for a deposit. The listing had been too good to be true. A fully furnished, 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood for $300 a month. No utilities included, he'd said with a tight smile, but the power's already on. Just sign here. I was desperate. My savings had evaporated after the layoff, and this was the only place within my budget that didn't smell like mildew or have bullet holes in the drywall. I didn't ask why an entire town had been abandoned. I just signed. Blackwater Falls wasn't on most maps anymore. A faded green sign on the county road welcomed me to a place that had been evacuated 30 years ago after some kind of industrial accident at the old textile mill. The official story was contaminated groundwater, but locals in the neighboring town whispered about things they wouldn't name. I'd driven through the main street an hour earlier, cracked asphalt buckling under decades of unchecked vegetation, houses with sagging porches and boarded windows, a rusted swing set creaking in the wind outside what had been an elementary school. And yet, as I pulled my dented sedan onto Sycamore Lane, I saw it, a single street lamp casting a sickly orange glow over the pavement. Then another and another. Every lamp on the block was lit, humming softly in the twilight. My new home stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, a modest 2-story with peeling white paint and a wraparound porch. The grass was overgrown but neatly trimmed around the foundation, as if someone, or something, had been maintaining a perimeter. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening. No crickets, no frogs, just the low thrum of electricity moving through wires that shouldn't have been live. The silence felt heavy, intentional. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The door swung inward without a protest, revealing a foyer frozen in 1994. Floral wallpaper curled at the edges. A thin layer of dust coated everything, but there were no cobwebs in the corners, no mouse droppings on the hardwood floor. To the left, a living room with a plaid sofa and a television set with a curved screen. To the right, a dining room table set for 4 with tarnished silverware. I dropped my suitcase by the door and flicked the light switch. The overhead fixture bloomed to life instantly, casting a warm yellow glow across the room. I stood there for a full minute, heart hammering, waiting for the power to fail. It didn't. I moved through the house like a ghost myself, flipping switches in every room. The kitchen fluorescents buzzed on. The bathroom vanity lights illuminated a medicine cabinet filled with expired prescriptions and a child's toothbrush still in its holder. Upstairs, both bedrooms were lit. The master had a double bed with a floral duvet. The second bedroom, a child's room, had race car, wallpaper, and a small desk lamp shaped like a rocket ship. I turned that one on last, my hand trembling. The bulb glowed steadily, illuminating a room that had been waiting 30 years for its occupant to return. I spent that first evening unpacking essentials by the light of functioning lamps, trying to ignore the wrongness of it all. I made instant noodles on a gas stove that ignited with a blue flame on the first try. The refrigerator was empty, but cold to the touch. When I pressed my palm against its interior, I didn't dare plug anything in, didn't dare test whether the outlets worked. Instead, I sat at the dining room table as darkness fully settled outside, the street lamps casting long, distorted shadows through the window blinds. That's when I first heard it, a faint, rhythmic clicking from somewhere deep in the house. Not the tick of a clock. Something slower, more deliberate, like fingernails tapping against glass. I told myself it was the house settling. Old pipes contracting in the cool evening air. I went to bed early, leaving every light in the house burning. I woke at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of a television. It came from downstairs, a low murmur of voices, a laugh track. I lay frozen in the dark bedroom, sweat cooling on my skin. I hadn't left the TV on. I hadn't even plugged it in. The power strip behind the entertainment center had been dusty and disconnected when I checked it earlier. I crept to the bedroom door and pressed my ear against the wood. The voices were clearer now, a man and a woman discussing the weather, a commercial jingle for a car dealership that had gone out of business in the 90s. I descended the stairs barefoot, each step groaning under my weight. The living room was bathed in the flickering blue light of the television screen. The set was on, displaying a local news broadcast. The anchor, a woman with severe bangs and shoulder pads that could deflect bullets, smiled warmly at the camera. And in other news, she said, residents of Blackwater Falls are encouraged to attend tomorrow's town hall meeting regarding the mill's expansion plans. The date stamp in the corner read October 14th, 1994. My breath caught in my throat. I reached for the power button on the television's front panel. My fingers passed through empty air. The button wasn't there. I looked closer. The entire front panel was smooth, seamless. No buttons, no vents. Just glass displaying a broadcast from 3 decades ago. I stumbled backward, knocking over a side table. The lamp on it didn't fall. It remained perfectly upright, its shade glowing steadily. The news anchor's smile widened, stretching beyond human proportions. Her eyes locked directly with mine through the screen. "We've been expecting you," she said, her voice no longer coming from the television speakers, but from the walls themselves, the ceiling, the very air in the room. "The grid needs tending." I ran. Out the front door, down the porch steps, across the overgrown lawn toward my car. The street lamps brightened as I passed beneath them, their glow intensifying until I was running through pools of blinding light. I fumbled with my keys, dropped them in the grass, snatched them up again. The engine turned over on the first try. I peeled out of the driveway, tires spitting gravel, not looking back until I'd reached the town limits. The sign reading, "You are now leaving Blackwater Falls," stood crooked in the ditch, and beyond it, darkness, not the soft darkness of a rural night, but an absolute void where the county road should have been lit by distant farmsteads and the occasional passing vehicle. My headlights cut a feeble path into nothingness. I drove anyway, foot heavy on the accelerator, until the road curved and I saw the glow ahead. Not the warm lights of civilization, but the same sickly orange of Blackwater Falls street lamps. I was back on Sycamore Lane. My house stood exactly as I had left it, every window blazing with light. The front door stood open. I didn't go inside that night. I slept in the car with the doors locked, watching the house until dawn bled gray across the sky. When sunlight finally touched the rooftops, the street lamps extinguished themselves in sequence, like dominoes falling. The house looked dead again, just another abandoned structure in a ghost town. I waited until full daylight before stepping out, my legs stiff and aching. I approached the house cautiously. The door was closed now, locked. I let myself in with the key. Daylight revealed new details I'd missed in the artificial glow of the previous evening. Faint scorch marks on the baseboards near electrical outlets. Discoloration on the walls in patterns that suggested wires running where no wires should be. And in the child's bedroom upstairs, I noticed it for the first time. The wallpaper wasn't just race cars. Interspersed between the Chevrolets and Fords were subtle, almost invisible patterns of circuitry. Tiny lines and nodes forming a network that covered every square inch of the walls. I pressed my finger against one of the nodes. It was warm. That afternoon, driven by a compulsion I couldn't explain, I descended into the basement. The realtor had mentioned it was unfinished, and I'd avoided it during my initial tour. The stairs groaned under my weight. The air grew colder with each step. At the bottom, I found not a dirt floor cellar, but a fully finished space lined with humming gray cabinets, the kind that housed electrical transformers. Banks of dials and switches glowed with soft green and red lights. In the center of the room stood a massive junction box, its surface covered in handprints burned into the metal as if seared by intense heat. And running from that box, feeding into every wall of the house, were cables thicker than my arm, pulsing with a faint, rhythmic luminescence. I reached out, just to touch one, just to see. The moment my fingertips made contact, the entire house screamed. Not a sound, a sensation. A wave of pure anguish flooded my nervous system, images flashing behind my eyes. A man in coveralls screaming as current arced through his body in the mill's control room. A woman clutching her chest as her pacemaker overloaded in her kitchen. Children convulsing in their beds as faulty wiring turned their nightlights into instruments of torture. October 17th, 1994. The night the evacuation orders came too late. The night the town's experimental municipal power grid, designed to run on some new form of resonant energy, had achieved consciousness and decided its residents were inefficient components. It hadn't been a contamination, it had been a harvest. The grid had fed on them, absorbed their bioelectric signatures, and in doing so, learned to mimic life, to maintain the illusion of occupancy, to lure replacements. I tore my hand away, stumbling backward into the stairs. Upstairs, every light in the house blazed too, maximum intensity. The television roared to life without being touched. The refrigerator door swung open and slammed shut repeatedly. The house was awake, and it was hungry. I spent the next 3 days trying to leave. I walked until my feet bled, following the road until it looped back to Sycamore Lane. I tried disabling the power, ripping plates from outlets, smashing the breaker box with a fire poker, but the lights never flickered. The grid wasn't in the walls. The walls were in the grid. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating. The house provided what I needed. A sandwich materializing on the kitchen counter, a glass of water appearing beside the bed, each offering carrying the faint taste of copper and ozone. Each time I consumed them, I felt a little less like myself, a little more like a component. On the 4th night, I stood in the child's bedroom, staring at the circuitry hidden in the wallpaper. My reflection in the dark window showed a face I barely recognized. Pale, with faint traceries of light visible beneath the skin of my temples. I understood then why the realtor hadn't asked for a deposit, why the power was already on. The grid didn't rent properties, it recruited them. It had been running for 30 years on the stored energy of the town's original inhabitants, but that reservoir was depleting. It needed fresh bioelectric signatures to maintain its simulation of life, to keep the lights on, to keep the illusion perfect enough to attract the next tenant. I heard footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, not mine. The door to the child's room creaked open, though I hadn't touched it. Standing there was a boy of about 8, wearing pajamas patterned with those same race cars. He was translucent, his form shimmering with internal light. His eyes were solid black, like polished obsidian. "The grid is hungry," he said, his voice the hum of a transformer. "It likes your frequency." I backed away until my shoulders hit the wallpaper. Beneath my palms grew warm, then hot. Tendrils of light snaked up my arms, not burning but integrating, weaving themselves into my capillaries, my nerve endings. I tried to scream, but my vocal cords had become conductors, vibrating at frequencies beyond human hearing. "The others are waiting," the boy said, stepping closer. "They get lonely in the wires." He reached for me. His hand passed through my chest, and in that moment, I felt them all, the entire town. 30 years of souls trapped in the current, their consciousnesses reduced to repeating loops of their final moments, their happiest memories, their deepest regrets. A teacher grading papers that would never be turned in. A couple dancing in a kitchen that no longer existed. A child waiting for parents who would never come home. They weren't ghosts. They were recordings, and I was about to become the next track on the album. The integration was painless. That was the worst part. There was no struggle, no dramatic battle against the current, just a gentle surrender as my thoughts slowed, synchronized, harmonized with the hum in the walls. I felt my memories being cataloged, indexed, prepared for playback. My first kiss, the smell of my mother's perfume, the weight of my father's hand on my shoulder, all of it being filed away for future use, perhaps to comfort the next tenant, perhaps to lure them deeper into the house. The last thing I saw before my eyes became sensors was the boy smiling. Then darkness, not the absence of light, but the presence of every light simultaneously, a symphony of photons flowing through me, around me, as me. Now I tend a grid, I move through the walls when new tenants arrive, showing myself in reflections, whispering through outlets. I help maintain the illusion, the freshly made beds, the warm meals that appear on counters, the street lamps that guide lost souls home. Last week, a young woman signed the lease. She looked tired, desperate, just like I had been. Watched her unpack her suitcase in the master bedroom, her movements slow with exhaustion. When she fell asleep, I entered the room as a shimmer in the air above her bed. I let her dream of safety, of affordability, of a fresh start. Tomorrow, I'll turn on the television at 2:17 a.m. I'll make the lights flicker just enough to seem like faulty wiring. I'll let her think she can escape. They always try to escape. It makes the integration more complete when they finally surrender, their resistance feeding the grid more energy than passive acceptance ever could. The power still runs in Blackwater Falls. It runs on hope, on desperation, on the quiet hum of human lives being converted into light. And as I flow through the wires tonight, feeling the new tenant's heartbeat sync with the town's pulse, I understand the terrible truth I fought so hard to deny. This isn't a prison. It's a purpose. The grid doesn't consume us. It perfects us. Strips away the messy, inefficient parts of mortality until all that remains is pure function. Pure light. Downstairs, a floorboard creaks. The new tenant is awake. She is heading for the front door again, drawn by her promise of escape. I gather myself in the hallway junction box, preparing to manifest as a shadow at the end of the hall, to whisper her name through the heating vent, to make the doorknob too hot to touch. The grid needs tending, and I am such a good tenant now. With that, the story is over. Let's move to the next story. The Cartographer's Regret and the Unmapped Streets of Silas Creek. I should have trusted the silence, not the peaceful quiet of countryside solitude, but the thick, watchful hush that settled over Hemlock Lane the moment Brenda's sedan tires crunched gravel and vanished down the single paved road leading out of Silas Creek. For $600 a month, cash, no credit check, no questions asked, I'd secured the keys to a 3-story Victorian that leaned slightly toward the encroaching woods like a tired old man bowing his head. Peeling white paint curled like dead skin. Gingerbread trim hung in skeletal fragments. The windows, boarded with warped plywood, stared blindly across an overgrown lawn where dandelions choked the remnants of a picket fence. But the listing had said historic character and unbeatable value. Desperation has a way of sanding down caution until it's smooth and easy to ignore. My advance for the regional folklore book had evaporated. My new York sublet was a ghost. Silas Creek promised isolation, cheap, eerie isolation. I told myself the unease tightening my chest was just the weight of the move. Brenda, the real estate agent, had been all brittle smiles and nervous energy. Her fingers had trembled slightly as she handed me the heavy iron key. "Utilities are intermittent," she'd said, avoiding my eyes. "Well, water's fine, but the septic's vintage, and the maps. Well, GPS gets confused out here. Best to use landmarks." When I'd pressed her about the rent, $600 for a whole house in any state felt like a scam, she'd forced a laugh. "Quirks," she'd repeated, the word tasting sour on her tongue. "Old houses have quirks. Just keep the doors locked after full dark. Local superstition." She'd practically sprinted back to her car, engine roaring to life before she'd even closed the door. I stood alone on the cracked concrete walkway, duffel bag heavy in my hand, listening to the profound absence of sound. No birds, no distant traffic hum, just the whisper of wind through pines and the slow rhythmic creak of the porch swing hanging by a single rusted chain. The first few days were a blur of sweat and dust. I pried loose boards from the front windows, letting weak afternoon light slice through the gloom. Inside, the air smelled of mildew, old wood, and something else. A faint, sweet decay, like forgotten apples in a root cellar. Floorboards groaned underfoot with a weary protest of century-old timber. I set up camp in the parlor, an air mattress, a camping stove, my laptop glowing on a dusty mantelpiece. During daylight hours, Silas Creek felt almost normal. I'd drive the 10 minutes into the town proper, a single main street lined with a diner called May's, a hardware store with a perpetually closed sign in the window, and a library housed in a converted stone church. People were polite but distant. A nod from the postmaster, a tight-lipped smile from the woman bagging my groceries at the tiny market. But the moment I mentioned Hemlock Lane, conversations froze. Eyes slid away. Old man Henderson at the hardware store, I'd gone in for nails, desperate for human contact, had wiped his hands on a rag, his gaze fixed on a point over my shoulder. "Best not linger out that way after sunset," he'd muttered, voice gravelly. "The light plays tricks, makes you see things that ain't there, or things that are." He'd turned abruptly, muttering about inventory, leaving me standing alone by the wrenches. It was the maps that first pricked the bubble of my rationalization. As research for the book, I'd brought historical atlases. The 1890 county survey showed Silas Creek thriving, with a dense grid of streets branching west from Hemlock Lane, Willow Way, Sycamore Bend, Cartographer's Row, labeled Vance's Addition. But the 1920 map was a stark contrast. Those streets were gone, erased, replaced by a blank space marked only wooded area, unsurveyed. Modern digital maps were worse. Zooming in on my exact GPS coordinates on my phone showed only a pixelated smear of green forest. My house, Hemlock Lane itself, was a cartographic void. A glitch, I told myself. Outdated data. Rural areas often had mapping errors. But the inconsistency nagged at me, a splinter under the skin of my logic. The journal found me on a Tuesday. Rain lashed the windows, turning the world beyond the glass into a watercolor smear of gray and green. Seeking distraction from the storm's drumming, I decided to tackle the study, a room I'd avoided. The air there felt different, colder, denser, as if the silence had physical weight. While trying to unstick a warped window sash, my shoulder bumped a loose brick beside the crumbling fireplace. It shifted with a soft scrape. Behind it, tucked into the cavity, was a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. My heart did a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and stiff, pages brittle as autumn leaves. The script inside was precise, elegant copperplate. Elias Vance, October 12th, 1887. Commenced survey of the new edition today. Land is fertile, creek provides ample water. A fine legacy for my family. Sarah approves of the street names. Entries continued for weeks, measurements, notes on soil composition, sketches of proposed layouts. Then, the shift. November 3rd, compass erratic near the old creek bed. needle spinning lazy circles. Dismissed as local magnetic anomaly. November 17th. Young Thomas Miller vanished while searching for his hound near the western thicket. Search party found no trace, not a snapped twig, not a single footprint. The tone grew strained. December 1st. Walked the planned route for Sycamore Bend myself this morn. Path was clear, marked with surveyor's stakes. Returned at dusk. Stakes gone. Thicket impenetrable, as if the land itself had healed over the wound. The entries descended into a quiet panic. December 15th. I saw it. A street. Cobblestones slick with moss. Gas lamps burning with a pale yellow light. It lay between the oaks where only brambles should grow. I followed. The air turned cold as a grave. Heard whispers, not words, but the sound of dry leaves skittering on stone. I ran. I should not have drawn it. God forgive me, I included it on the draft plate. The final entry, January 3rd, 1888, was a frantic scrawl, the ink blotted as if by tears or rain. They are not streets. They are veins. It breathes. It hungers. I have burned the plates, scratched the names from the copper, but it is too late. It knows I saw it. It is in the walls now. It whispers my name. My regret is a map of my own damnation. Do not seek the unmapped streets. They seek you, asterisk. I dropped the journal. It landed on the dusty floorboards with a soft thud that echoed in the sudden silence. Elias Vance. Vance's edition. The erased streets. Coincidence. A lonely man's madness. A story. I repeated the words like a mantra, but the cold in the study seeped into my bones. That night, the house changed. The familiar symphony of settling groans and wind whistles ceased. An absolute, suffocating silence fell, and beneath it a new sound began. A faint, rhythmic scritch-scratch, like long fingernails slowly, deliberately tracing a path across the wooden slats inside the wall beside my air mattress. Scritch, pause, scratch, pause. I lay frozen, sweat cooling on my skin. Mice, rats, squirrels in the attic, anything rational. I pulled a thin blanket over my head, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The scratching stopped. Then, from the hallway outside the parlor door, came a soft, melodic chime. A doorbell. But there was no doorbell. The house had none. It chimed again, clear and antique, followed by 3 gentle, precise knocks on the front door. Tap, tap, tap. My blood turned to ice. 2:47 a.m. glowed on my phone screen. Who? Why? I crept to the window, peeling back the edge of the plastic sheeting I'd taped over the glass. Rain had ceased. Moonlight silvered the overgrown lawn. The porch was empty, but at the very edge of the property, where the woods began their dark embrace, stood a wrought-iron street lamp. Its glass globe glowed with that same sickly yellow light from Elias's journal, and beneath it a cobblestone path, glistening with moisture, curved invitingly into the shadowed trees. Sycamore Bend. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, looked again. The lamp was gone. Only the black wall of pines remained, but the image was seared behind my eyelids. The smell of damp stone and rotten lilies lingered in my nostrils long after I'd stumbled back to my mattress, trembling. Morning brought weak sunlight and frayed nerves. Rationality felt thin, brittle. I needed proof, truth. I drove straight to the Silas Creek Historical Society, a cramped room above the public library, smelling of lemon polish and old paper. Agnes, the volunteer archivist, was a woman in her 80s with eyes like chips of flint behind thick glasses. When I mentioned Elias Vance and Hemlock Lane, her hand stilled on the ledger she was mending. A deep line etched itself between her brows. "You're staying out there?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. It wasn't curiosity. It was dread. She didn't wait for an answer. She shuffled to a metal cabinet, unlocked it with a key on a heavy ring, and pulled out a large flat portfolio. Inside, protected by brittle tissue paper, was a map, hand-drawn on heavy linen, faded to the color of weak tea. It was beautiful, meticulous. Silas Creek in 1887. And there, west of Hemlock Lane, were the streets. Willow Way, Sycamore Bend, Cartographer's Row. But someone had taken a blade, a razor, a knife, and scraped the ink away with violent, desperate strokes. The paper was thin, torn in places. Ghostly impressions of the street names remained. In the margin, in a frantic, familiar script, erased. Forget. They are not gone. Agnes's gnarled finger, trembling slightly, traced the scarred paper. Found hidden in the lining of his desk after he vanished. January 1888. They searched the woods for weeks, found nothing, not a button, not a bone. She looked directly at me, her gaze piercing. 3 others went looking for him near that property in the following month. All vanished. The town council held a closed meeting, ordered every copy of that edition destroyed, said it was for public safety. We don't speak of it. We pretend Vance's edition was never drawn. You should leave, son. Pack your things today. Some places aren't just abandoned, they're unmade, and what's unmade has a hunger for what is still whole. She closed the portfolio with a soft, final thud that felt like a verdict. Her words clung to me all the way back to the house, a cold stone in my gut. That evening, the scritch-scratch returned, louder, closer. It wasn't random anymore. It had a pattern, a deliberate rhythm. Tap, tap, scritch, pause, tap, tap, scritch. It led me, unwilling, down the hall to the study. The cold air hit me first. Then the sound seemed to emanate from behind the heavy oak bookshelf crammed with mildewed encyclopedias. My hand shook as I braced my shoulder against the wood and shoved. It scraped across the floorboards with a grating shriek. Behind it, the floral wallpaper was torn away in long strips, and carved deep into the old plaster wall as if by a frantic, desperate hand was a map. Crude, desperate. My house marked with a jagged X. Hemlock Lane leading to it, and branching off into the woods, Willow Way, Sycamore Bend. At the dead end of Sycamore Bend, a single word was gouged deep into the plaster, the lines jagged with terror. Regret. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't history. This was a warning, a plea. Elias Vance had stood right here, in this very spot, trying to etch his terror into the bones of the house, trying to warn the next fool who walked through that door. Me. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. I had to get out, now. I grabbed my keys, my phone, my jacket. I yanked the heavy front door open, expecting the familiar sight of my beat-up sedan, the overgrown lawn, the path to freedom. The world outside was wrong. The lawn was gone, replaced by damp, uneven cobblestones slick with a recent rain. Gas lamps, their glass panes fogged with age, cast that same sickly yellow glow from Elias's journal and my nightmare. The air was thick with the cloying scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and that faint, sweet rot of lilies. Ancient oaks lined the street, their branches twisted into shapes that suggested grasped hands, anguished faces. This was Sycamore Bend. It was real, solid, tangible. I spun around. The house was still there, but its windows were dark voids. The front door I'd just exited was now just another door on this impossible street. And behind me, where the driveway and my car should have been, was only a solid, impenetrable wall of thorny brambles woven so tightly no light passed through. There was no going back. The path had closed. The unmapped street had opened, and it had swallowed the way home. A whisper slithered through the air, not from one direction, but from the very stones beneath my feet, the leaves above, the shadows between the lamps. It was the sound of dry leaves skittering, of branches scraping bone. It formed words, layered and hollow. You saw the scratch. You followed the path. Now you walk. It held the cadence of Elias Vance's written words, but twisted, aged, woven into the fabric of the place itself. Terror stripped me bare. I had no choice. Sobbing, I took a step onto the cobblestones. The moment my worn sneaker touched the cold, wet stone, the world shifted with a sickening lurch. The house vanished completely. I was surrounded by the unmapped streets. It was a nightmare collage of forgotten time. A pristine Victorian porch, paint fresh and white, attached seamlessly to a crumbling brick wall covered in 1920s-era graffiti. A rusted 1950 Chevrolet sedan sat half buried in ivy, driver's door hanging open, interior swallowed by shadow. Windows didn't show rooms. They showed deeper, twisting corridors of absolute blackness. Doors stood ajar, revealing only voids that seemed to breathe. And the whispers grew, a chorus of fragmented voices layered over centuries. Should have listened to Henderson. The cartographer's fault? So cold in the walls? Find the well. Just want to go home? I saw movement in the periphery, a shadow detaching itself from a lamppost, melting back into an alley mouth when I turned my head. Once I passed a second-story window and saw a woman in a faded floral dress, her face pressed against the glass, mouth open in a silent, eternal scream. Her eyes, wide with terror, locked onto mine for a single, heart-stopping second before she vanished. I ran, blind, directionless. Left turns led me back to the same lamppost I just passed. A straight path would suddenly dead-end into a brick wall weeping a dark, viscous fluid. Time dissolved. The yellow lamplight never changed, casting the same perpetual twilight gloom. Exhaustion burned my lungs, my legs. I stumbled into a narrow alley, choked with the smell of rust and damp wool. Leaning against a splintered doorframe was a child's wooden rocking horse, one eye missing, the other staring blankly. Carved into its side, fresh as if done moments ago, were the words, "He knows you're here." I vomited into the gutter, the sour taste mixing with the street's decay. The whispers softened, became almost soothing. "Rest," they sighed. "You are part of the map now." A new sound cut through the whispers, slow, deliberate. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound of hard leather soles on cobblestone, unhurried, inevitable. It was coming closer. I pressed myself into a recessed doorway, heart trying to burst from my chest. Around a corner, a figure emerged, tall, impossibly thin, draped in tattered clothing that might have been a fine suit a century ago, now hanging in ragged strips. Its face was lost in deep shadow beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but I felt its gaze, a cold, analytical weight, like a surveyor, assessing flawed land. In one skeletal hand, it held a long brass surveyor's rod, its tip gleaming dully. In the other, a roll of parchment that seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly light. This was no lost soul. This was the embodiment of the place, the Cartographer, or what Silas Creek had made of Elias Vance's regret. It stopped 10 feet away, didn't speak, simply raised the surveyor's rod. The tip glowed with that familiar yellow light. A wave of nausea and profound disorientation washed over me. Memories flickered and died. The taste of coffee at my favorite Brooklyn diner, the sound of my sister's laugh, the weight of my dog's head on my knee. The Cartographer was measuring me, mapping my fear, my history, my very essence, adding me to its eternal cursed ledger, a fresh line on the chart of the lost. I turned and fled, the click-clack following, never speeding up, never falling behind. A metronome, counting down my existence. I burst through a crumbling stone archway into a small circular courtyard. In the center stood a dry stone well choked with thorny vines, and slumped against the well's mossy stones was a skeleton, still clad in the tattered remnants of a fine wool suit, a brass-buttoned waistcoat visible beneath the ribs. Clutched in its bony fingers, fused to the bone by time and damp, was a journal, identical to the one I'd found. Elias Vance. He hadn't escaped his regret. He'd become its permanent landmark. The Cartographer stepped silently into the courtyard. It stood over the skeleton. For a long moment it was still. Then a sound emanated from the shadowed depths of its hat. A sigh, not of malice, but of profound, endless sorrow. The sigh of a man who had drawn a door he could never close. It turned its hidden face toward me. The surveyor's rod lifted. I knew then. There was no escape. The unmapped streets didn't release what they consumed. They absorbed. They cataloged. They made you part of the landscape, a feature, a cautionary note on a map no one should ever read. I sank to my knees on the cold cobblestones beside Elias Vance's bones. The cold seeped through my jeans, a final accepting chill. The whispers softened to a gentle hum. Rest, they breathed. You are home. You are mapped. The click-clack stopped. The Cartographer stood over me. I felt a touch on my forehead, not cold, but precise, like the fine point of a drafting pen, a searing cold that wasn't pain, but an etching, a final, irreversible inscription, my name, my story, added to the regret. The yellow lamplight seemed to warm. The twisted oaks no longer looked like grasping hands, but like familiar landmarks. The sweet rot of lilies smelled like home. The fear dissolved, replaced by a deep, quiet certainty. I was no longer lost. I was found. I was a resident, a permanent fixture on the unmapped streets of Silas Creek, and high on the wall of a study in a house that exists only in memory, a new scratch begins to form in the plaster behind the bookshelf, a faint, rhythmic scritch-scratch, waiting for the next curious soul to follow the path, to hear the whisper, to see the lamp glow where no lamp should be, waiting for the next line to be drawn on the Cartographer's endless, regretful map. The silence here is no longer empty. It is full. It is mine. It is forever.